Yeah, I think that's going to help our product development in particular. Yeah, because I mean, within Aruba, 10,000 people, I think 3,000 or 4,000 of them are doing R&D. So absolutely, AI is going to help them on the coding side of it for sure.
Yeah, or not.
I think.
Well, I'm just saying that number might be half in 10 years' time.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the dystopian
I personally think so. Forget my business per se. When we talk to customers about AI, particularly in the network space, the level of threats they're getting from a security perspective are just increasing exponentially. So anything that you can do to
the Cloudflare said that DDoS is through the roof or something.
Yeah. So anything that you can do to free up time.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast here on the sunniest, warmest day of the year in London. Were
you braced for it?
I was braced for it. I'm not sure I was braced for the enormous amount of distraction that I had on the way in, which I'll leave there.
Yeah, I think you should.
But there's something about England when the weather gets good, everyone breaks out their summer gear.
But you've got your own legs out as well.
I've got my legs out. Yeah.
They're a sight.
If you got it, flaunt it. Well, they're long.
You got two of them.
Give them that. Yeah, they're long and I got two of them.
Very impressive.
So that's great. You can already hear that we have a special guest. We're delighted to welcome Phil Mottram. Is it?
Yep.
From HPE.
Yep.
You're welcome, Phil.
Yep.
Now, you did bring some beers. There's good news and there's bad news when it comes to beers with Phil. Good news is he brought some. But even better news, he brought 8.
Yeah.
Bad news is they're fucking Fosters.
Foster's is pretty good.
But I think we'll give you a pass, apart from the fact that we're polite and we'd always give our guests a pass.
It's the gesture, you know.
We'll give you a pass because you're also hungover, so fair play to you, mate.
Slightly.
You're out on what I'm sure was a very important work due last night.
It was with customers. With customers.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone knows. You know, we had a tangent on the last pod where we were talking about AI sort of taking over this, that, and the other, and I'm sure we'll talk about AI in a bit.
Yep.
And we're going, look, what it can't replace is just people interacting with people.
Yeah.
And there we are. Everyone knows
they can't drink beer.
That you got to go out and get pissed with customers. I mean, that's not going to change. You're not going to send a sort of booze bot out with your customers, are you? Getting pissed while he watched telly. So so good for you. Old school business going on there. And you're doing, what is it, a half Ironman?
I am doing the Venice half Ironman in Italy.
Jesus Christ!
This Sunday.
So tell us what that comprises of.
That's a 1.2 mile swim, a 56 mile bike ride, and then a 13 mile run.
God, man. Well, I doff my hat to you.
How many of those have you done before? You've presumably done.
I've done about probably 10 halves. I've done a couple of full Ironmans as well. So I did Austria in 2008. I actually did the World Championships in 2015 for charity.
Right.
In Hawaii.
God.
Wow. Well, I total respect to you, mate.
Yeah.
I was just telling you earlier that I managed a whole mile the other day. I was pretty fucking proud of myself.
Well done.
So
you deserve the calories.
Only 25 to go before I can run around London in a bunny suit.
This is our first one since the London Marathon. So
yeah,
shout out to my brother-in-law Jake Sargent who completed it.
Well played, Jake.
In 3:58, it was a pretty good time for a 50-year-old.
Oh my God! There's a woman a mom in my kid's school. She's doing today her 10th marathon in a row in 10 days.
Oh, wow.
And she did the London one in between. All under 4 hours.
God.
Unbelievable.
10th marathon. Well, we were just saying earlier, no disrespect to all the people we've noted and Phil and all that, but once you start to get into that level of distance running, I think there's something fucking weird going on.
And then the other ones, she was running by herself.
You know the world record for the number of back-to-back full Ironman triathlons? So that's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and then a marathon, is held by an English guy. And he did, I think it was either 102 or 103 on the road.
Day after day?
Every day.
See, that's
somewhere in North Wales, actually. I think he was in the Mould Leisure Centre.
God. That's...
But hats off to him.
Well, actually, and hats off to you, Phil, because you go to sort of contradict my assumption of such people is that they're such endurance athlete psychos that I can't imagine just sitting down having a beer. but you can. So you've obviously got a good balance between
Yeah, I wouldn't
masochism
categorise
and having a laugh.
Yeah, I wouldn't categorise myself as an athlete.
Well, he's still doing
I fucking
half Ironman though.
An athlete with a very small A.
Mate, you're definitely an athlete from my point of view. Not that that's any great compliment to me. So there we are. Oh, and we should say that we've also got Alistair, Phil's colleague Alistair, in the background. How's it going, Alistair? He's having a Foster's too, pretending he likes them because Phil bought
As
them.
his boss said, he needs to pretend to like them. We're just sponsored by Foster's. That's it. We don't like it either.
Yeah, exactly. HPE sponsored by Foster's. Yeah, talking about sponsorship, actually, Alistair, I don't know if we've met face-to-face before, but you've certainly met Ian face-to-face. You take him to the Ryder Cup. You took him to some American football, didn't you?
No, not American football.
Oh, was that a different
I did go to
vendor?
the Ryder Cup with HPE
right.
when it was in Rome.
Oh, well,
I've not been to the American football with
that must have
HPE.
been nice, Ian, going to all those sport events.
It was very nice, yes. Thank you very much, Scott.
Do you know
Thank
that
to
we're
HPE.
the technology partner for that event?
I do, through Ian, yes, I
And
do.
do you know how we do the network around the course?
It's a mixture of Wi-Fi and a little bit of private 5G.
Correct.
Yeah, which is why I went. It was actually a work thing. It was nothing to do with watching golf.
Yeah, you're not
and
even that
enjoying
bothered
myself.
about golf, are you?
You only
I
observing
actually
No,
enjoyed
no.
watching it.
I was only bringing it up just to needle Alistair for inviting you and not me, that's all. Oh, did you? Oh, fuck, I think you're right.
Now you should feel bad.
So,
Yes.
yeah, so I look like a dick, and my whole premise of my joke is totally undermined. I apologise, Alistair. I now that you've said it, I do remember, and just thinking, I think I did have something on. But yeah, all right, well, there we are. That's that joke down the toilet, isn't it? Better crack on. What, have we been up to anything else since the last pod?
Not work related. The only thing I've done that's
We're
very
out for a
interesting
few.
is watching the London Marathon. Actually at it.
What, you just went there and watched it?
Well, I was at mile 23 at the Alzheimer's bit, which is what he was raising money for, watching my brother-in-law go past.
Right.
So,
Did you just turn up when you knew he was going to be there, or had you been stood
well,
there
these
since he
days you get
took
a
off?
tracking app, which is the kind of thing that someone like HPE might do because I remember at the Ryder Cup they were doing apps to sort of help the players manage the sort of event. But it's really good because there's a tag that you have on your shoe.
Yeah.
And when you go past various beacons, it kind of provides you with a split time, and you can actually track them on the course where they are.
Yeah.
And
So
is
you
he
can see
allowed,
where-
to,
see where
is he
he's
allowed
coming.
to take his phone with him on the course?
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
loads of people with arm straps, other people with Apple Watches, obviously doing it that way.
Yeah,
So-
because on the Ironman things, you're not allowed to take your phone.
right.
You wouldn't want it in the swimming bit anyway, would you?
Probably not in the swim.
There's people with I've had ones before, like half marathons, where they don't allow you to listen to music doing it.
Yeah.
And there were people
yeah.
listening to the music on the London Marathon. Clearly, you could see
Yeah,
them going
but,
past.
but nowadays, obviously, you can get sunglasses, can't you, with built-in
Yeah,
kind of
you can.
speakers. So you wonder how
can't
they'd actually
tell.
know.
Yeah, they don't like you wearing those big kind of noise cancelling
Yeah.
headphones where you've got no idea what's going on around you. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Even if it's a recording of someone going, "Keep running, you bastard."
exactly.
Right.
But yeah, I've not been out and about for work.
No, we met. Give a shout out to some of our colleagues, Brian and the team from Computer Weekly. We met at the pub last Friday, and then also our colleague Matt, who used to be at Omdia and is now off in Saudi Arabia doing Tahaluf stuff over there. So give them a shout out because we saw them last week. But yeah, other than that, there's no worky business going on. So yeah, I'll cut straight to it. We had a funny one, Phil. A couple of weeks ago, we had Alianza. Yeah, we had.
Dag Peak.
Dag from Alianza. So
Do you know the company Alianza? They bought. You might know them
Bought
from a
Metaswitch off
transaction. They bought
Microsoft.
Metaswitch off Microsoft.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Anyway, we had him on a couple of weeks ago, and in this opening bit, we were about to crack on, and then Pierre sort of talked about the Pope dying, and then we had about 10 minutes of speculating about the succession
Well, it's Donald Trump,
mechanism.
isn't it? Donald Trump is the next Pope.
Oh, that's right. Donald Trump's put his hand up to be Pope.
Yeah.
And anyway, and Dag, when we were halfway through just speculating about the conclave and the fucking white smoke and all that, he went, "Am I on the right pod?" Which I thought was a great comment. Didn't you know you were on the Catholic pod?
Did you have a chat with the barman as well?
Yeah.
To,
Look at you
replenish
two
my-
racing ahead.
Yeah, it's hot, isn't it?
I'm taking this thing seriously. It is quite warm in this room, by the way.
Yeah,
It's quite
really
warm.
Yeah.
There's a distinct AC. I mean, there are vents that look like they should provide AC, but there's no controller, there's no dial for it, is there? Yeah, I suppose you're racing ahead because I've been just banging on, so maybe I should shut up. Maybe the lack of beer I've been drinking is a sign that I should shut the fuck up.
Are you here to talk or are you here to drink beer?
Well, indeed.
He's definitely here to drink beer.
That's a joke, isn't it?
Probably.
Yeah, I heard it. God, someone told me. I think I was chatting to someone about the culture difference between like Swedes and Finns or something like that. And the Finns are apparently especially taciturn and sparing in their conversation, even compared to the Swedes. And there was some joke where a Swede and a Finn meet up in a bar, and the Swede goes, what are you having? And he goes, are you here to talk or are you here to drink? Or something like that. I probably butchered the joke. But that was their thing. They just drink silently in Finland, apparently.
I'm sitting in saunas silently.
Yes, just grimly getting through their moonshine. So Phil, you're from HP, and people might be wondering, well, I'm leading up to the E bit. But I've queued up another shit joke here, so stop trampling on it.
I'm just trying to head it off at the pass, but go on.
Yeah, because I'd already telegraphed my shit joke to Phil beforehand. What's a bloke from a printer company doing on a Telecoms podcast? So there's the joke. Well done. Badum chish. I'm here all week. Try the veal.
I was fixing the printer on floor 4.
There we are, and we just went, he'll do. He looks sufficiently mashed. No, obviously, HP's a very venerable and established technology company. And about a decade ago, was it, Alistair, that they did a formal splitting off the consumer bit, which includes printers and PCs and shit like that.
Yep.
And then the enterprise bit, which is what the E bit of HPE stands for. And what's your job at HPE?
I look after the Aruba networking business for HPE.
Cool. Okay, so that is why you're on a Telecoms.com podcast.
Correct.
So, yeah, why don't we just take it from the top for people who aren't that familiar, because HPE does so much different stuff. Just take it from the top. And I remember writing years ago, HP went on a bit of a M&A sort of frenzy, I seem to remember, which included Aruba.
Yeah.
But there was it 3Com, was that one? I can't remember. Anyway, they were buying some telecoms or telecom adjacent stuff.
Yeah, I think
a few
the
years
company's
ago.
made about 30 or 40 acquisitions
They
in
like
the last
it.
7 or 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Always
Obviously, most of them
inquisitive
very
as
small.
Informer.
Yeah, there's been some small ones. I think probably Aruba was probably the biggest one. But yeah, I mean, the company obviously is famous for its activity in servers and compute.
Yeah.
It's got a big business in storage, doing a lot in private cloud, AI, supercomputers. So the company bought Cray, and then networking is a big part of the business as well.
How big would like Aruba and the stuff that you're looking after be as a kind of percentage of the size of the overall thing?
Yeah, so overall the company is 60,000 people and about early 30 billion turnover dollars.
Yeah.
And Aruba is just coming up to about 10,000 people and about $5 billion revenue.
Yeah, so it's a big bit.
Yeah.
Big chunk.
Of it. And growing at the moment? Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you in charge of the whole thing?
Yeah.
That bit?
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's proper grown up.
Yeah.
We've got a proper grown up on the pod again, Ian. I'm scared. Over to you.
A big wig.
So, yeah, well, I mean, just taking it from the top again to people who are listening and who, I don't like to assume too much prior knowledge. What's your bit of HP actually do?
All right, so we do 6 things. We're famous for Wi-Fi. So if you look at the ceilings, not in this particular room, but in the most buildings, you'll see Wi-Fi access points. We've been making those for 22 years, so that's where the company started. And then what I tend to do is I sort of follow the network. So access points connect to switches in buildings, so LAN campus switches. We make and sell those. Then you go outside of a building and you hit an SD-WAN network. So we do SD-WAN. We bought a company called Silver Peak about 5-6 years ago.
Yep.
Networking and security is coming together. So we bought an SSE company called Axis Security about 18 months ago. So they do kind of zero trust, SWIG and CASB. And then we do 2 other things. One
Zero
is
trust swig.
Yeah, zero trust swigging.
That sounds like doing pints, but cautiously.
And then we also do data center networking and private 5G. So they're the 6 product areas, and we link it all together on a platform called Aruba Central, which allows customers to provision and manage their networks.
Cool. So it's a whole bunch of enterprise connectivity stuff.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
A lot of which I'm very ignorant about, I've got to be honest. It gets into that stage where, I've been doing this job for about 11 years and I've picked up a thing or two, but I'm sort of acutely aware of the fact that I've never bothered to go off and actually hit the books.
On Wi-Fi and that sort of stuff.
Well,
it's quite
on
different
just how
from
telecoms works, to be honest. It's still kind of magic as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, look, my background is more in telecoms, so I used to work in, Vodafone, BT, Telstra, those sorts of companies. So yeah, it's kind of new to me as well. I've been doing this for about 4 years.
Right.
But yeah, the Wi-Fi space is kind of different to normal kind of telecoms.
Where do you sit on this whole? Because there's always this debate about. You always get the sense that the cellular guys are kind of in battle with the Wi-Fi guys.
Yeah,
we need this 6 gigahertz. This 6.
They're fighting over
band.
spectrum.
They're always fighting over spectrum.
Exactly right.
But you've been on both sides of it, and HPE's obviously in the 5G area to some extent, not as a kind of operator, obviously. But what's your kind of feeling about that? They kind of make out they're going to be completely screwed if they don't get this spectrum. But I always sort of think, well, there's a lot more Wi-Fi, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I think when people were talking about 5G, the launch of 5G, private 5G a couple of years ago, I heard that one of the CEOs of a big telco was going to seeing customers and saying, oh, by the way, 5 years from now, you're not going to need Wi-Fi in your building because the 5G is going to be so good, right? And I don't think that's going to pan out like that, right? If you think about this building, any other building, you've got printers all connect to Wi-Fi. Your laptop all connects to Wi-Fi. Building control, fire alarms. There's a whole Wi-Fi ecosystem. So, yeah, I think Wi-Fi and kind of 5G cellular networks will live in parallel for generations,
Yeah. 5G to me always seems to be more of an outdoor thing, really.
Yeah, I think so,
And therefore, unless you sort of on a bus upstairs and you're 15 years old looking at skateboarding videos.
I'm getting 1 bar, barely. 4G here.
Yeah. So I mean the big we need to sort of cover it off, but the big move that obviously is in your area is this sort of Juniper deal to a big extent. Which was announced quite a long time ago now.
What the fuck is going on there, Phil?
Yeah, we're dragging our feet, obviously.
What is happening?
So my boss, who's the CEO of HPE, Antonio Neri, was behind the Aruba acquisition. That's been pretty successful for the company.
As you're testament to.
Correct, yeah, exactly right. And so about 15 months ago, we announced our intention to buy Juniper Networks, mainly because the company wants to double down on networking. Juniper is slightly bigger than Aruba, so it's about 12,000 people, about $5.5 billion of turnover.
Big M&A.
Yeah, and they have kind of a slightly different profile of business, which I can come back to later. But yeah, we announced our intention to buy Juniper in a deal that's worth $14 billion just over 15 months ago. And obviously there's a bit of turmoil in US politics, some changes of administration, etc., which you may have heard about. And ultimately, I think we need 15 approvals from various countries around the world. We got 13 very quickly, UK, Europe, those sorts of big players. But then the US and Israel are the two outstanding ones.
Yeah.
Israel typically follow US pretty quickly. But yeah, the Department of Justice about 3 months ago announced their intention to try and block the merger. Because they believe that it kind of restricts competition, in particular in the US Wi-Fi market. We disagree with that assertion, and so right now the plan is that we have a court date with the DOJ on July the 9th. Court judge has been appointed. I think the trial's going to take just over a week, so I would imagine by August timeframe we should have a decision as to whether or not they're going to let the merger go forward or not. But we believe there's a great opportunity here to create a kind of scale player versus Cisco and try and kind of change the enterprise market.
Do you know off the top of your head, when we're talking about this particular market, what the respective market shares are? Because like very crudely, if you're talking and I know it's a lot more nuanced and complicated than this, but if you're talking monopoly, if an M&A is leading to someone having 49% or less of the market, then let's see what the problem is. If it's more than 50%, then maybe there is a problem. But do we know what kind of market share that's concerning the DOJ that the combination would lead to?
Well, look, I've not read the full detail of their particular case, but, net, there's a lot of Wi-Fi players in the US market, right?
It's not like you'd be
not
cornering
just ourselves, Cisco and Juniper.
It's not like Ericsson buying Nokia.
Exactly right. There's lots, Ubiquiti, Extreme, Ruckus, Nile, Meter. There's a long list of other companies. So anyway, we're reasonably confident of our case. So, we'll have our day in court and all that.
Why do you think they've come? Because it's a bit... I remember when it came out.
Yeah.
I think when the deal was first announced, everybody thought... And I remember talking to analysts and they were this won't be a problem. Just, okay, done.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it sort of dragged on and the DOJ came out with its thing and everybody's like, what's going on here? It sounds a bit odd. Has someone said something to the DOJ? Or have they looked at this the wrong way? But why do you think they've come up with...
I don't work for the DOJ.
Yeah,
so
just wondering if you would speculate.
Yeah. Look,
I'll speculate. I'll speculate because the jeopardy for me is significantly less than it is for Phil.
Right.
I think a lot of it's political.
Yeah.
I think under the last lot, they had this woman, Lena Khan, at the FTC. And I know this is DOJ, but she's sort of symbolic. And there was a distinct going after American big tech thing. Yeah. Now, typically, they're referring more to like the internet hyperscalers, but... in terms of company size, companies like HPE will be getting up there. So it could well be that they fell on their radar. And I think the political feeling was that these companies, and I've got some sympathy with this view, are pseudo-monopolists. We might talk more about this to do with Apple at the end. They are pseudo-monopolists. You look at how much choice do you have, I don't know, like in terms of browser or in terms of app stores or in terms of the public cloud market that we talk about. There's three main players and so on. And, and there's, Meta's getting hassled to acquire WhatsApp and Instagram.
Which how they could do that, really.
No, I don't know how they could do it. And actually, that's one I disagree with. Even if they do have a near monopoly on some aspects of social media, the reason I'm opposed to that is on a due process basis. If it was approved, then you can't fucking unapprove it. I mean, the precedent's there. It's a bit ridiculous to approve a merger and then 10 years later go, no, actually, we've dropped the ball on that one.
Especially by this stage when they'd be very integrated, their systems and unwinding.
Yeah, but it's just a matter of like regulatory and legal principle. For me, you approved it. It's a done deal.
Yeah.
But then there might be some argument that maybe like Google's under pressure to separate off Chrome from the rest of the business, or is it search? I think it's Chrome.
Yeah.
Well, you do get the trust busting stuff coming in, don't you? I mean, dating back.
Yeah, well,
to
that's what a lot of
Standard Oil. When it got broken up, people have often been calling for these tech monopolies to.
So that's my
tech monopolies. I'll take that back. They're not necessarily tech monopolies, but big tech companies to be
virtual monopolies, pseudo monopolies. Yeah, and I think so. That's my speculation. I think they've come under that umbrella, and what could be interesting, and what presumably Phil and his colleagues have got their fingers crossed about, is that the new political wind that's come in with Trump, albeit with the, even by his standards, unprecedented chaos that's come with it, is, he's got this America first, pro-America, nationalist sort of thing. And typically, if people are more nationalist, they're inclined to let big M&A go through if they think it's to the aggregate benefit of the whole country.
Yeah.
So it could be that politically, but then the problem is you never know.
Yeah, well, exactly right. I mean, we could speculate all day. But, I mean, no, if you look at Juniper's business, they've got kind of three distinct segments of business. One is all of the work that they do with telecoms operators around the world, which they've been doing for years, haven't they? They do a great job there. That's a big part of the business. And that's all incremental to what HPE does, right? So that's additive to our business, so there's no conflict there. They also do a lot with the cloud providers, specifically in AI networking. So as the big cloud providers are building out these AI clusters, they're typically using Juniper technology to connect those clusters. Again, that's something that we don't do. So
this is sort of like Ethernet technologies.
Well, it's high speed. Yeah, exactly right. Ethernet, basically to link
within the actual data centers.
Exactly right. Linking AI clusters. And then the third part of their business is the enterprise business, where there's some areas of conflict around Wi-Fi, but they do a lot of stuff that we don't do, like routing, firewalls. We do stuff that they don't do, like P5G, etc. So, look, net, we think HPE acquiring Juniper is good for customers, good for the market, and good for competition.
Was it mainly about the kind of...
Good boilerplate pro M&A one. I'm sure I've heard that in words to that effect lots of times before.
Well, is it wrong to sort of look at it because the DOJ seems to have looked at it as, this is a Wi-Fi deal, it's mainly about Wi-Fi, and it's going to, and yeah, we can talk.
Yeah, I
about
think that's where
market
their
share.
objection is.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
is it wrong to look at it that way?
Yeah, I mean, our point is
Yeah.
this is way broader. And actually, if you look at where Juniper competes, particularly outside of the US, quite often they're competing with the likes of Huawei as well. So actually, HPE taking over Juniper kind of gives Juniper a bit of a lift on a global
That is
scale
definitely
as well.
the right button to be pressing right now.
Well, that was the button that was pressed, I think, in some recent.
Right, and it
blogs.
work even more now.
Well,
The amount of times I see bits of corporate messaging coming over where they sort of insinuate, if you don't let us do what we want, the Chinese will win, sort of thing. Because the thing about Trump is he's fairly. I wouldn't necessarily say he's unsubtle, though he often is, but he's very overt about his proclivities and his biases and his agenda. So you just see it everywhere, people going, okay, we've got to Trumpify this bit of messaging, because there's a good chance that if you do it, he'll read it very fleetingly and go, yeah, that sounds like it's right up my street.
Yeah, whether it's Trumpified or not, but the bit where they'd be competing against Huawei, I'm guessing would be in some of that Ethernet stuff going into data centers.
And also in the carrier space as well.
And in the carrier space, yeah.
Exactly right.
On the transport sort of technology
exactly
side
right.
of things.
As network operators are building out, metro networks, etc., that's typically where they're picking Juniper technology. But at the same time, they're considering, Huawei, Cisco, Nokia, whoever
And they're still
it may
not
be.
banned, where they're banned from like 5G networks, they're not banned from that sort of thing.
Well,
I mean, that depends by
being banned.
country,
Okay.
doesn't it? So in some countries they're flat out banned, but there's
from
large part of the
everything.
world where large parts of the world, Africa, Asia,
Yeah.
China, where Huawei's welcome, encouraged, and flourishing as a business.
Yeah.
So.
But there'd be opportunities for Juniper in parts of Europe where they started off looking at 5G. Well, the UK is a good example of this. They started off looking at the 5G market and said you can't buy 5G equipment from Chinese vendors anymore. Now it's gone to fibre. I think the fibre stuff has to be out of the network by 2032. It's a slightly longer glide path or whatever.
Yeah, because it just
Don't
occurred
really
to
like
me.
that word, but
Glide path.
that sounds like the sort of thing that corporate people use. I shouldn't be
it's-
using
I
expressions
was
like
thinking
that.
the other day, Americans just love these little analogies and metaphors.
Yeah.
There's very few things that Americans will say in a corporate environment that doesn't involve some kind of metaphor.
Sporting.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah,
it could
that's
be
all right. I don't mind
sporting.
that.
I mean, there's
Ours
some I
are
quite
all
like.
Navy
I've used skate to where the puck's going to be before. I haven't got a problem with that one. It's
Yeah.
more things like, I don't know, just really evocative things like one throat to choke or open the kimono or just really bizarre things
One
like
throat
that.
to choke's a
What
bit
sort of phrase
nasty.
do
Fuck is going on there?
podcasters use?
Makes you wonder what they're up to the rest of the time.
Curmudgeonly, or what was it? Defenestras?
Oh yeah, defenestrate. Yeah.
Defenestrate. Yeah.
What was the context that we
had a sort of Scrabble round, didn't we, before we started?
Yeah.
Scrabble round.
Yeah, I think someone got sacked, and I said they were defenestrated.
Yeah. Now get on the Juniper sort of swapping out Huawei. I think there's opportunities for them to do that depending on the sort of
Right.
way the winds blow in Europe, and it's probably not going to go in a good direction for Huawei, I guess.
You never know. Europe might have a massive strop.
Unless
Unless
they have a
fuck it.
Well,
We're going all in with Huawei. So you like that, Trump?
Trump's not sort of doing his best to make friends in Europe, I suppose. So you never know. But I mean, looking at the bits of the Juniper business, because you've talked about those three sort of elements, I'm guessing this is based on conversations I've had with Nokia before, really, who very much regard their kind of network infrastructure bit, which is a bit that's kind of competing against Juniper as the growth engine of the company at the moment. Is that where you'd expect most of the sales opportunity to be?
Well, I think that's a growth.
So
that's a growth area, and obviously that's cyclical, isn't it?
Because this is driven by AI to some extent, isn't it?
So I think there's a couple of different things, aren't there? One is the rollout of networks, which I think is cyclical. So you get a technology change, 4G to 5G.
Yeah.
At some point we get 6G, whatever, right? So that happens, and then there's a kind of rollout of networks, isn't it? As they try and get 5G technology closer
Glide
to
path, you could say.
a glide path to 5G in Cornwall or wherever it might be, right? But they're rolling out or densification of the networks, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that's one area. On the AI side, though, if you think about it from a HPE overall perspective, we do a lot in AI systems, supercomputers. If you look at the top 10 fastest computer systems in the world, 7 of them built by HPE, right?
Yep.
And so when you're building those systems, you need to link them all together from a network perspective, and that's where the Juniper technology would be very helpful.
Right.
So that makes me think, We chatted about Nokia recently, and they're having quite a strong play in data center interconnect.
Yep.
Which I think encompasses both the connectivity within a data center and between data centers. So would Nokia be a direct competitor of yours in that area?
They would compete with Juniper, less so with Ariba.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. But then you actually do a lot of the other stuff that's in the data center in other parts of HPE.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. If you walk into a data center, there's a lot of HPE technology in a data center: storage systems, servers.
Yeah.
Some networking products, some security products. Yeah, we do a lot in data centers.
Yeah, because I always used to think of HP even before the E maybe and Dell as alongside one or two others like maybe Supermicro, but there are a few just really big players in data centers actually. I guess IBM's another doing the racks.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So I mean, going back to the kind of Wi-Fi side of things, the bit where the stuff we're talking about where they're competing against Nokia, there's no real overlap there.
No.
The bit with the Wi-Fi, Aruba, and I think it's called Mist, isn't it? Juniper's product.
Juniper.
That's obviously quite a bit of overlap. I mean, I think that's one thing the analysts were talking about a lot when the deal first got announced, that it's not going to be a regulatory problem, but how do you integrate those assets? What do you keep? What do you get rid of?
Exactly right.
Is that the kind of, have you had any kind of more thought? Because I suppose you've had a lot of time to think about it while things have been rolling.
Yeah, it's one of these things where actually you're not allowed to make firm product plans in the advance of approval of any deal. Because if you do, it's seen as gun jumping, blah, 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 blah. So, we're kind of clear on some of the principles under which we want to operate. First thing is, no customer wants to be told, right, you now how to kind of, got to now sort of steer hard left or steer hard right, You want to take customers on a journey. And so our plans would probably be centred around trying to integrate technologies over time versus cutting, product paths off.
And are they strong in that Wi-Fi space? Are Juniper strong in particular geographies where you're not? Does Mist have some AI elements?
Look, a lot of the US, a lot of Juniper's business is in the US. We're probably more global as an organisation, HPE.
Right.
Juniper's got a very strong platform called Mist. Mist is kind of lent into some kind of AI capabilities, but we have similar AI capabilities on our platform as well with the Aruba Central.
So what do these AI things do in Wi-Fi systems?
Yeah,
basically?
so
because people don't really think that
yeah. So here's a good example. So Aruba Central is our platform, and it manages customers' networks. One good example of what it does from an AI perspective is it can look at the usage. So we're in a building here in London, which obviously the viewers won't know. It's how many floors in this building? 10 floors or something?
19.
19
We're
floors.
on the 15th.
Okay, there we go. 19 floors then, right? And I don't know, I guess in a building like this, you would probably have, 400 access points maybe? Something like that?
Right.
And what the system can do is it can look at the usage profiles on the access points and work out that, 2:30 every Friday afternoon, there's hardly anyone in the building, and it doesn't spark up again until, 9:30 on a Monday morning. So why don't we power down all of the access points over the weekend to save power consumption? Right, so that's a pretty simple, look at the usage on the platform, work out when can we start powering off.
And that's AI.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we used to call automation?
Well, I think it's a bit more clever than automation because it's actually looking at the real usage patterns for a particular customer in a particular building.
So are you inferring that automations are much more sort of prescribed, just turn it off at night, turn it on in the morning sort of thing, whereas AI is constantly real time, getting clued up? Because that's, funnily enough, I'll give a little shout out to my colleagues, Omdio. After the pod we're going to do next Friday, I'm going straight off to chair a live thing they're doing on the 90th floor of this very office, where they're going to talk about AI in telecoms. So if anyone's interested, it's free to enter. You can turn up here. There's even some beers after. So check it out I think I've shared it on LinkedIn, or check it out on Omdia's website or whatever. But anyway, one of the things that we can talk about, and I'm part of the reason they've drafted me in, I think, i.e. drafted in a journalist, is to be a bit contrarian and push back a little bit. Because these analysts, the analysts are plenty opinionated, especially some of the ones that are doing it next week. But it's still...
Can you mention their names? The opinionated
ones? Yeah, I say it with affection. Camille, Roz... they're not...
She knows how to start off a good row.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No.
Is that a compliment?
Yeah, it is actually. I think it's really good.
Yeah, she
But
just shoots from the
I
hip.
like to see panels where there's a bit of to and fro.
And Roz is really articulate and extrovert in her communication as well. And there's another guy whose name escapes me because I haven't met him. Sorry, other guy. But even among such exalted and free speaking company, part of a journalist's job is to, it's not quite say the unsayable. Although, as I'm sure you can tell from the format of this podcast, we're not too worried about fucking up.
I'd pick that up.
Yeah, but it's also just to sort of push back on what can be sort of consensus or groupthink or whatever.
Yeah.
And with AI, there's so much buzz around it, and there's so much utopian talk about how it's going to make everything brilliant. I think part of the job, and it comes naturally to curmudgeons like us, to be a bit Luddite and push back a little bit. But in this context, and that's why I asked you about the difference between AI and automation.
Yeah.
I think that's a good illustration of where it's not just hype spam.
Yeah.
And
It's
it
a
really
real
is doing
practical-
something different. And do you think
This is not generative AI we're talking about here, though, is it? This is something that's been around for much longer. This is more sort of predictive. It used to be called predictive AI, didn't it? I suppose.
Well, I mean, it's
differentiate
in
it,
a
but-
few different things, but our platform has its own kind of large language model, and
Right.
it's kind of picking up usage patterns from a particular customer, trends, that sort of stuff. So.
Okay.
Oh, so that's interesting because obviously, I mean, Ian sort of touched on where I was going to go. The hype around AI has obviously been around for ages.
Yep.
As we're reminded of every time I reference the Terminator, which is an 80s film. And obviously sci-fi writers have been writing about it even since before then. But then when Gen AI and ChatGPT and that sort of thing came along, was it a couple of years ago now?
Yeah, that's when it came to public attention.
Yeah,
I suppose.
yeah. It seemed to catalyse a whole new hype cycle.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's relevant for Ian to ask about the generative AI side of it. And one thing that interests me is whether or not one of the significant things about generative AI is it's like auto coding, the way generative AI can actually write code.
Yeah.
Does that augment like product development and machine learning and that sort of
Yeah,
thing?
I think that's going to help our product development in particular. Yeah, because I mean, within Aruba, 10,000 people, I think 3,000 or 4,000 of them are doing R&D. So absolutely,
Right.
AI is going to help them on the coding side of it for sure.
Yeah, or not.
I think it will.
Well, I'm just saying that number might be half in 10 years' time.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the
maybe.
dystopian
I
worry.
personally think so. Forget my business per se. When we talk to customers about AI, particularly in the network space, the level of threats they're getting from a security perspective are just increasing
Yes.
exponentially.
I saw
So
a
anything
report on
that
that.
you can do to
I think
free up
Cloudflare said that DDoS is through the roof or something.
Yeah.
recently.
So anything that you can do to free up time from a
Right.
network manager to make his or her job easier in terms of managing a network, that's not
Yeah.
a job at the door. That's
Yeah.
right. That's great. I can now spend more time dealing
On
with this
stuff
kind of
only humans can
security.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. And that,
No, I
and
think that's a good
what's
counter-argument.
happening, I don't see a situation where you're going to see massive layoffs in networking technology and that sort of stuff. Far from it. I just think there's just different threats that people are going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I was curious about that because if you look at companies that are a bit outside your space, in a sector that's really challenged at the moment, which is the RAN market, where there's been a big decline in spending in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
There's a story I wrote this week actually on layoffs at Ericsson and Nokia, which have been quite dramatic in just 2 years. I think 20,000 people, it's about 10% of the workforce.
Yeah.
And Nokia is now at the situation where, and I talked to the guy who's in head of mobile networks, Tommy Wito, at Mobile World Congress, where they've made lots of cuts on the network side to sort of address losing business in the US. They had this setback with AT&T.
Oh yeah.
And he said, well, we've put sort of guardrails around R&D. That's the bit that the critical functions are protected from that, and we still need those people. But you kind of wonder whether with AI going where people like Sam Altman think it can go, and maybe this is all science fiction, even what he's saying. But it does seem to be scarily effective these days compared with where we thought it was going to be 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Could even some of these R&D jobs or these more value add jobs be affected? I'm guessing
potentially, but I would have thought that's a few years off, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would as well. It's just, I suppose it's a long-term direction of it.
So on the more on the more sort of utopian rather than dystopian side.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want another one?
Yeah, how are you doing, Alistair?
Look like Moorish, the old philosophers, aren't they?
Oh, before we jump to
Alistair
another
was
topic.
a cynic. Now he's been converted.
Right. So on the
Yeah, it's got,
They're actually nice, aren't they? As it gets warmer.
we got
in
an ice chest here, mate. There's no expense spared.
you were talking about Aruba and where AI comes in, but
Yeah.
would Mist be doing quite similar stuff, or is there something with their sort of AI capabilities that's a little bit different that you're sort
Look,
of
I mean,
looking at?
I don't know the full detail of their platform. You know, Mist has got a good reputation in the AI space. We've got a team of about 80 AI data scientists building AI magic into our platform. Where our platform is also quite different is that the Mist platform's based in the cloud only, right?
Right.
Our platform, Aruba Central, is available in the cloud, which a lot of customers want. We also make it available in a virtual private cloud version, and we do an on-prem version. And if you think about what's going on with trade wars, etc., etc.,
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
built into the actual, almost the actual points themselves.
No.
or
But
it would
we
still be in
will
a
give
server
you
in
the
right.
software. So if you're a
Okay.
European
Yeah.
organisation and
Yeah.
European customers are really concerned about this,
We're going to
don't-
get onto that more from Microsoft's blog. That
yeah,
they put
exactly right.
yesterday, yeah.
So you know, there's some European customers that do not want to buy technology
Yeah.
that's touching the public cloud,
Yeah.
and in particular a US public cloud, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, we offer our management platform, Aruba Central, to customers for them to either deploy it in their own cloud instance or have it on their own premises. At which point, it's not touching any US cloud.
Whereas Mist,
infrastructure.
you'd have to have it within a sort of data center.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that distinction.
But he's not
That's
allowed
quite
to know about Juniper yet, mate.
Yeah, well,
Well, you
I
can
know,
read
we-
these things on the website, but you know they
Just
operate.
being facetious.
Mist is a cloud-based service.
yeah.
So all that sovereign cloud stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I might just put a pin in it because there's plenty of directions we can go there that don't necessarily directly affect HPE.
I want to
So-
talk about the Ryder Cup
Yeah, go on.
because when I had the opportunity to go to the Ryder Cup, like when was it, Alistair? Late 23.
When I
in
was
Rome.
invited.
It was very noticeable that the connectivity was supported with like Aruba Wi-Fi
Yeah.
outside, on a big golf course and everything.
Yeah.
It was Wi-Fi
That's
and
kind of the point, wasn't it?
worked. Yeah, no, but this is the interesting thing because you pushed more a bit into the 5G space,
Yeah.
obviously, with this Athernet acquisition. There were some guys from Athernet there. And there's always this talk, and we've had analysts on the pod before talking about this private 5G versus Wi-Fi discussion. And I'm pretty sure I've talked to you about this before when I met you a couple of years ago. But how's that going? Is that clearer where you'd use one and where you'd use the other, and what the attractions are from HPE's perspective of one over the other?
Yeah. So I mean, the golf Ryder Cup example is probably a good one. It's kind of interesting because the technology officer for the Ryder Cup, a guy called Michael Cole, I don't know if you've met him or not, a really good guy.
Yeah, he was there. I did meet him,
He kind of talks about it that 5 or 10 years ago, it was the stuff of nightmares. People showing up at a major golf event with their phones. Someone's trying to land a putt or whatever it might be, take a really important putt, and all this sort of stuff. Whereas now, they actually encourage people to take their phones and they want them to take videos and then upload them onto Facebook and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
because they're obviously
to
getting
the
way more
buzz.
coverage.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And for sponsors and all that sort of stuff, it's a good idea. So, in Rome, as you may or may not know, if you dig into the ground and come across some historical artifact, then the whole thing gets shut down for 12 months or 18 months
Yeah.
until
Right.
of excavators come
Which
along.
on one level's fair enough.
Yeah,
'cause,
exactly right. And so what we did with the Ryder Cup is we used private 5G to do the backhaul links across the holes. So as opposed to laying, fiber connectivity between the holes to link the access points, we used private 5G.
Okay.
So it's this kind of mixing of technology. So you had Wi-Fi access points on the holes, but then to get back to the internet or, onto the next hole, it was using
So you wouldn't
private
use,
5G.
I mean, this is probably a really stupid question, but you wouldn't use Wi-Fi for the backhaul.
No, it was using private 5G.
But why wouldn't you?
I think you get more capacity on private 5G
and more
versus
security of connection.
Well, it's not so much security thing. So where private 5G is helpful is around outdoor coverage and speed in particular, right? So from an outdoor coverage perspective, the way I think about it pretty simply is to cover an area that can be covered by one private 5G base station, you would need 8 outdoor Wi-Fi access points.
Right.
Okay,
And is
so
that
you've got
just a
8 times
product
the
of
coverage.
the frequency, or is it also the underlying technology?
Yeah, I think it's the spectrum.
It's the spectrum, yeah.
Exactly right. So
the low band sort of, it's to do with propagation, is it, characteristics?
I think it's, well, yeah, you're basically getting, this is where it varies by country, which is a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
But, I think here in the UK, you can phone up Ofcom and say, right, here's a postcode, and I want to buy my own local spectrum around this postcode, and they will give you a slice of the 5G spectrum. So when they did the auctions, they held back
for that
spectrum. They didn't give it to the operators.
Yeah.
And so if you, for some reason, own, I don't know, 20 factories or warehouses in Bolton, for the sake of argument, and you think, right, one option is I deploy a load of Wi-Fi for those warehouses, or my other option could be I'll phone up Ofcom, buy some spectrum, and then deploy private 5G across that area. So, it gives you alternatives.
Right.
But as I say, it varies by country. So UK, you can do that with Ofcom. In Australia, for example, they didn't hold back any spectrum. They gave it all to the carriers. So in Australia, if you want private 5G,
you've got to go to the
you
carrier.
have to work with the carrier.
Yeah.
In Germany, they held some back. And they're trying to give it to enterprise customers, because I think what they're trying to do is encourage BMW, Mercedes, those sorts of players to use the spectrum for autonomous vehicles. In the US, it's something called CBRS, which is, I think it's the old CB radio, breaker type stuff.
Yeah.
But you use that on the basis that if the Coast Guard ever want it, they can kick you off it. Right.
It's not ideal, is it?
Correct. And then you think about some of the private 5G use cases. Some of them are in ports, right?
Right.
So, if you're in the middle of Chicago or, the plains of Ohio or somewhere mid-US using private 5G, the chances of getting kicked off by the Coast Guard are pretty slim.
You'd have a strong case to tell the Coast Guard to fuck off.
Get off my land.
What are you doing here? Get on the coast. There's a clue in the name.
Correct. Whereas if you're in a port next to a Coast Guard station, you can understand their argument, couldn't you?
Right.
So it kind of varies around the world.
But is the fact that Wi-Fi is sort of not licensed in the same way, is there, I mean, this is one of the arguments that the cellular guys come out with, that because it's licensed spectrum and it's less subject to interference, it's a better bet for doing some enterprise 5G stuff than relying on Wi-Fi to do those things. Is that?
Yeah, I don't think about it like that. But, the way I think about it is where you've got outdoor coverage or speed, then that's when private 5G is a consideration. And on the speed side of it, again, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because Wi-Fi as a technology grew up connecting your laptop to an access point. And whilst you might move around an office, you're not doing it that much, are you?
Yeah.
Whereas cellular technology, you're driving down a motorway, 70 miles an hour, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Normally you can hold a signal. So the technology is very good at handing off base station, and coping with speed and latency, right? So therefore, we have customers who use private 5G in warehouses where they don't have any people. They've got robots whizzing up and down aisles, stacking shelves and all that sort of stuff. They use private 5G because they think the speed element is supported better by private 5G versus Wi-Fi.
So what I'm getting from that, like, to distill it down to words of one syllable, is that for things that are mobile, and I guess there's a clue in the name there, isn't there? Then mobile technologies are better.
There you go. You can't get any clearer than that.
Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of simplicity that I need, Phil. But I was gonna,
for mobile stuff, mobile's good.
No,
for
mobile better.
Wi-Fi stuff, probably Wi-Fi stuff.
Yeah, but Wi-Fi's better for static stuff.
That's the kind of insight we bring.
Genius.
That's the kind of added value you uniquely get from the Telecoms.com podcast. But conversely, Wi-Fi's better for static.
That down?
Make a little note.
Do you want to patent it?
Take it to Antonio and Neary and go, you won't fucking believe what's
I've had a light bulb moment.
Yeah. And then Wi-Fi conversely better for static.
So In the Ryder Cup, when you were using backhauled 5G, that was leased from a carrier, was it? Then in that instance, or
I can't remember what the spectrum rules are, but you're not using any like cable, obviously.
Yeah.
You're just using spectrum. I don't know the rules. So again,
they loaned it to the Italian government.
Oh, there you go. So it sounds like it wasn't in the hands.
Saying that the Italian government handed over some spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Ryder Cup, and they
supported
the
it.
idea of private 5G.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Breaking all our
Oh,
infrastructure.
sorry, can we pause 1 second?
Yeah.
We're going to pause.
Some mic just died.
Sorry.
Are we?
Yeah, we're good.
working?
Phil, has anyone ever compared you to Alec Baldwin? I just suddenly got an Alec Baldwin vibe from you. Yeah.
But
I should have saved that for when we're recording.
No.
We are recording.
Oh, we are recording. Okay, there we go.
Weirdly, a couple of years ago, I got divorced about 4 years ago. And so a couple of years ago, I went out with this girl. And her ex was the spitting image of Alec Baldwin, right? I mean,
Well, there we are.
right?
Not a coincidence,
But
I would
then, weirdly,
argue.
So they were, and I think he was quite a wealthy guy. They went to some resort in, I don't know, Barbados or wherever, and Alec Baldwin was in the restaurant, and he walked up to Alec Baldwin and said, "All right, mate, blah 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 blah. Do you get a lot of people walking up to you
Saying
saying
you
you
look
look like Chris
And I-
such and such?"
Alec Baldwin's like, oh, another smart ass. That's the last thing I knew.
Yeah, exactly.
If only you'd been there.
Yeah, exactly right. I could have
Yeah.
got a different spin on it.
But apparently I'm the first person to compare you to him.
Yeah,
So
I've
there we
had
go.
Rodney of Only Fools and Horses. I mean, I
that's not-
Yeah,
I prefer Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, yeah.
Ronnie's too
I'm not
thin,
seeing
and-
Nicholas Lyndhurst there at all.
I mean, he's like a broomstick. It's not someone you want to be compared to.
I bet he doesn't do fucking Iron Men though.
Yeah, exactly right.
Anyway, where were we?
We were talking about private 5G.
Oh yeah,
and,
one thing I was just going to quickly ask about that, and I think that's a really interesting one. The private 5G versus Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
One thing I was kind of skirting around a minute ago. So, like CBRS that you just mentioned is in the 3.5 gigahertz band, and Wi-Fi is also loosely parts of it are in the 3.5 gigahertz band. Is that right?
I don't know.
I think so. And so I was just wondering. So you might not know this either. Whether like for like, you get the same performance or you get the same bandwidth per megahertz on Wi-Fi or 5G in a specific band, because this is something that came up years ago when we were talking about 5G or maybe even 4G, and is it a big deal, and is there some special source in 5G that makes the connectivity somehow better?
But I think you answered your own question a minute ago.
Which
When you
how
were
did I
saying
do that?
mobiles for mobile.
Right. Yeah, no, but I was just wondering, beside that, whether or not there's any difference in the technologies in terms of spectrum utilization, in terms of how...
One thing I was wondering whether Wi-Fi could do, because people talking about 5G Advanced and some of these whizzier features that come with that, and standalone and all this stuff. But, and Wi-Fi, which Scott and I know far less about, I think.
Yeah.
And not that we know vast amounts about 5G Advanced necessarily, but...
I don't know as much as I know about doing Iron Man.
It's going through its own standardisation to Wi-Fi 7 and this sort of thing, and there's a roadmap after that. But things like network slicing and some of these other features that get built into 5G, are those sort of available? Because those are presumably things that might be valuable to enterprise customers to have, or not so much. You don't think, or
Not really, I don't think.
Right.
I mean, I think my understanding of 5G network slicing is it gives a national operator, mobile operator, the ability to segment their national network.
so it's not really relevant in an enterprise context anyway. You wouldn't have
Well,
thought.
it may be relevant to, a carrier might want to say to you, Phil Mottram Networks opens up and says, I tell you what, you're a consumer customer, I'm going to charge you 30 quid a month for your tariff. You're a business customer, I'm going to charge you 40 quid a month for the sake of argument, but I always guarantee that you're going to have the first class service on the network, right?
Right.
And if we ever get to a point where there's a congestion point in the network, so the network's got a capacity of 1, you're trying to download something, he's trying to download something, I'm going to kick him off and you're always going to get onto the network. I mean, that's my understanding of network slicing is they can kind of
Prioritising.
segment the network, and
Yeah,
off the back
yeah.
of that, they can then prioritise.
That's where you sometimes
can,
get
yeah.
people, and I don't even know if I necessarily agree with this angle, but you get people going on about net neutrality and that sort of thing in the area of network slicing. Because anytime someone appears to be prioritised on the network, this is more of an American thing. They're a bit more obsessed about net
Oh,
neutrality.
they are here
there.
as well, though.
Are they?
I mean, if you talk to someone like Andrea Donner at Vodafone, not that I've talked to him for a long time, but I remember a couple of years ago he was saying like we need clearer legislation in the UK on net neutrality and what we can do because it might be a barrier to doing some network slicing stuff.
Yeah, I also think, by the way, another reason why carriers, particularly in Europe, are interested in net neutrality, they're also interested around the commercial terms as well associated with it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you look at
Selling-
the carrier equation,
Yeah.
you know, when you're downloading or hitting some social media websites or whatever you're looking at, you know, what the European carriers are making is next to nothing from
Yeah.
a profit perspective versus
Yeah.
the sites you're looking at.
That's
totally.
that's one reason I'm generally not on the side of the net neutrality purists. I think if you've gone to all the trouble and the massive capex of having a network, if you want to, you know, people own anything else. If they own real estate or they're having a gig or whatever, you get a gig. I've got this. My daughter's obsessing about it. She's into K-pop. She's obsessing about this Korean lad who's touring London
K-pop,
and some and you know, and it's at the O2, and the O2 or whoever's representing this bloke reserves the right to charge me tons more money depending on where in the stadium I sit, let alone VIP boxes and seeing him after or whatever.
Yeah.
That kind of bollocks that goes on. And you know, and that applies in all sorts of other settings. Why shouldn't operators be able to say, okay, I've created this service in a competitive market, and I want to be able to offer a premium service to certain people for a premium price. Yeah. So that's my biggest argument against it. I just sort of think fair enough.
Well, that's the argument, though, isn't it? Is like if you have a priority boarding queue, then everybody else waits longer. Who's not in the priority boarding queue.
Although I always think that's silly because you're all getting on the same plane, aren't you?
Yeah, but all right. So supermarket checkouts where they've put loads of automated stuff on, and if you don't want to use that or you can't because you've got cash. So sometimes I go into Sainsbury's with cash, and it's like there's nowhere to pay with cash nowadays. There's one cashier, and there's a queue of about 20 people.
So this is a pet peeve of Ian's.
So you're
phasing out of cash.
Yeah, we could talk about that if you want.
Anyway, so you were saying that you think if there was one queue that was better.
No, but this is because the internet services are viewed as a kind of human right.
Exactly.
They feel that if you disadvantage people on that particular service, it's unfair.
Understood.
And therefore, that's
or utilities, or people think about whether some people can get
we're
better,
getting a little bit off topic.
Better water
HPE
or better
stuff,
electricity. It's all right. We do tangents.
Okay,
they're allowed. Yes. So no. I think bringing the tangent back, we were talking about sort of private 5G and that sort of thing. Are there any other things? Because we're getting to a time where we will move on at some stage and talk about other news. Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, I'll hand it to you. And what else did you want to pick his brain?
I wanted to ask about Athernet, which was acquired, which is one of the acquisitions that happened.
Yeah.
I can't even remember when it happened. It's probably a couple of years ago.
18 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, because they did so going back to the Ryder Cup, they did do some core network stuff there.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of wondering how they sort of fit into HPE's strategy more broadly and how that's developing. I think there was talk of them being a bigger deal potentially in terms of going out and doing stuff in the main telco core networks at some point potentially. But is that, I'm just kind of wondering how you're thinking about Athernet.
Yeah, so Athernet is a private 5G company that we bought about 18 months ago. As you say, they're headquartered in Venice.
That's handy.
The home of Iron Man.
You're going to pop in when you're finished.
I don't think so. But anyway, so we bought that company. They're actually 18 years old as a company, so now they'd be like 20 years old.
Right.
Founded by some former Ericsson engineers. And they originally got into the business to do private kind of cellular networking. So they were segmenting networks. So one of their customers is some of the airports in France, where what they want to do in an airport is segment the network. So for one part of the network, it's just the customs and immigration officials. For another part of the network, you have the airlines. And then for another part of the network, you've got Joe Public, right?
Yeah, and you can prioritise accordingly.
Exactly right. So they
Don't get me
into-
started on public Wi-Fi in airports. Fucking nightmare.
So anyway, so that's how Ethernet started, and then they kind of followed the Gs, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and then that's when we bought them. And then what we focused on is trying to make 5G or private 5G as easy to consume as Wi-Fi. Okay,
Right.
So same contract, same support model, same management platform, yada yada. Because my sort of sort of nirvana is sit in front of a customer and say, "Oh right, what have you got? I've got 4 office buildings. Okay, I'll put you down for 400 access points. I've got 2 warehouses. Okay, I'll put you down for 4 private 5G equivalents." Right. So we're just trying to make it.
Is that the kind of deal you made last night when you were out on the lash?
Exactly right. Yeah. So we're just trying to make it as easy to sell and service as Wi-Fi. So that's what we've been focused on,
Right.
in particular for the last sort of 12 months or so. And in terms of how it's all going, look, it's got some good use cases. So we talked about warehouses, we talked about ports, ideally in the middle of Chicago. But we, military is very interested. So
Yeah.
This is the sort of stuff in a backpack that you can.
well, there's a bit of that, and then there's also modernisation of bases as well. So if you think
Okay.
about army bases, naval bases, you've got very expensive equipment on those bases, and also dangerous equipment, haven't you? So
Yeah.
keeping track of where everything is. You can help yourself a lot with a decent network.
It literally sounds like a good place to be in Europe at the moment. Now they also decided they need to spend a little bit more money.
Correct. Yeah, exactly right. So I think we'll see.
We said that about Nokia as well, haven't we?
Yeah, I think, look, as a technology, I think customers understand it a lot more now. They're more familiar with the use cases, so I think we'll start.
But
to
is
see
it quite different from? There's the guys in that core network space, and I'm talking about it from a private as well as a public perspective. Here would be Ericsson, Nokia, Mavenir, Cisco to some extent. Although, from my perspective, they seem to have kind of withdrawn from it a bit.
Yeah.
From there. Do you see it playing? When you see guys coming up against Ethernet in the areas that you want to play in, is it those big guys like Ericsson, Nokia, and what would the advantages be? I suppose.
Yeah, so what we see sometimes is, you'd have some of the big kind of network equipment providers who are saying, "I tell you what, I've deployed this huge 5G network across all of France, and now what I'm going to try and do is shrink it into something that's going to work in a port or a warehouse," right?
Right.
So that would be their approach.
Yeah.
What we're trying to say is, hey, look, we've got something that was designed and built for the requirements of an enterprise customer that can sit alongside Wi-Fi. So we've done less of the take the big thing and shrink it. We've kind of come up with the thing that we think will work for enterprise customers. So it's a bit more simple, scaled solution.
Okay. And they were doing stuff at the Ryder Cup, but I'm guessing they would. There's another Ryder Cup coming up fairly soon. And there's plans for them to sort of figure at that, or it's hard to say.
Well, the reason they were doing stuff at the Ryder Cup in Rome was because of the digging issue.
Right.
So for example, I think the next European one's in Ireland, is it? Does that sound about?
And you can dig that up all you want.
Yeah.
There's no relics on.
Anything in a fine is potatoes.
But in Ireland, I think my understanding
You thought you'd
is,
take my insulting generalisation a step further, did you?
So I think what the Irish, the people who run that golf course, I think what they've said to the organisers is, you can do whatever you want. But 2 years before the event, you have to have finished all of the infrastructure build. Because for the last 2 years, they want to be able to focus on, making sure they've got great greens, great fairways and all that sort of stuff. Versus, 2 Thursdays before the start, you've got someone digging the whole course.
Exactly.
Which
Got
is
up some geezer in a high-vis chest.
Yeah, exactly right.
vest.
Yeah, exactly right. So they've kind of opened up access to the course. So I would imagine what people will do there is they'll actually lay fibre infrastructure around the holes, I would imagine. But in the Rome situation, we didn't have that opportunity, so that's why we used private 5G.
It occurred to me when you were talking about Ethernet being based in Venice and being private 5G, you talk about the digging up and laying cable challenges in Rome. They must be fairly fucking considerable in Venice as well. So perhaps it's not a coincidence that they're really strong on wireless.
Yeah.
In an environment like that, just a guess.
Waterproof.
Could just be
5G.
bollocks. I went there about a year ago for the first time since I was a teenager, and it's such a uniquely amazing place. But the geographical implications of, this little island, this little very historical island, for doing things like infrastructure must be unique.
Oh god, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They've got some history there.
I know.
Can we take a toilet break now as well?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we? Back in the room. So we're about an hour in, aren't we, Pierre? So I might just do a segue onto some other more newsy stuff, if that's all right with you. Unless there's any other things that you think our audience really need to know about HPE that we haven't covered.
No, I think we've covered the main points. Let's do your segue.
Basically,
What about the convergence of network and security?
yeah. What about that, Phil?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
This is Alistair from the background reminding Phil of something that he wanted to talk about.
Very, very good point.
Convergence of network and security. Hit us with it, Phil. Why do we give a fuck about that?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Well, look,
That's the ultimate journalistic question.
Yeah, exactly right. Look, we bought Silver Peak, which is an SD-WAN business, about probably 6-7 years ago. And then, have you heard of this thing called SASE?
Yeah.
Secure Access Services Edge. So this is the kind of mix of some network functions and some security functions all coming together.
And why is that a thing? I first saw it as a buzzword, I don't know, a couple of years ago or something.
Yeah.
Why did it become a thing?
I think Gartner believe that 3 years from now, 60% of all organisations will want to buy integrated network and security under this thing called a SASE framework, right? Okay. And I think the reason it's becoming more of a thing is historically, internet started very much on the premise of any to any, so you could get wherever you wanted to on the network. And then you have these security threats, so people built these firewalls, which is essentially a moat, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to keep people out. And then they worked out, well, actually, you know what? Some of the threats are actually coming from inside the moat as well, aren't they? You occasionally get employees wandering into systems that they shouldn't be, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And so now you move to this concept of zero trust, so being very particular about, individuals, where they can go, which systems, which sites, et cetera, and in order to make that happen, you need the network, right? So network and security, we believe, are coming together. Off of the back of that, we bought a security company called Axis Security, who provide zero trust networking, secure web gateway.
So zero trust is the idea you don't need to worry about it, basically.
Yeah, basically you're going to try and assign permissions to individual users and say, I don't know, Phil works in the finance department, he can go into the SAP system, he can look at the ledgers, he can authorise expenses,
just good to go.
Whatever it is. I don't know, you work in marketing, you can't look at the HR systems, you can look at, whatever the...
You can't look at Auto anymore, apparently, things like that.
Right. Yeah. So zero trust, because it seems ambiguous to me. On one level, zero trust could mean that, it's so secure that you don't need to worry about whether you trust people. But then the other part of the ambiguity could be that you've just got no trust in anyone, like a fucking bad marriage or something. Which is it?
I think it's more the latter.
Right.
So I think you're starting with the premise that actually you don't trust anyone.
I see.
But you're then being
so that's literal interpretation.
Very specific about who can look at what and where can they go across the network.
I get it. Cool. By the way, I referred to Cloudflare. They did a blog earlier on this week, and the headline is, this is a Cloudflare, this is their DDoS threat report, targeted by 20.5 million DDoS attacks, up 358% year on year.
Oh, gotcha.
DDoS.
Yeah.
So it's
Cloudflare were the guys involved in the...
I think they're the ones that had the nightmare, wasn't it?
No,
Cloudmare, more like.
Strike.
CloudStrike. Oh, yeah, no. So Cloudflare's fine. Sorry.
CrowdStrike, you mean?
Yeah.
You said CloudStrike.
All right, Pierre.
CrowdStrike.
Well, you were the one who fucked up originally, to be fair. Let's start giving Pierre a hard time.
CrowdStrike, yes.
Anyway, it's not them. It's Cloudflare, and they do security. And they came up with a blog earlier on this week about how DDoS, distributed denial of service, which is basically where you sort of flood a network with shite.
Yeah, exactly.
To sort of to drown out the legitimate
I like that
stuff.
metaphor.
Yeah,
Flood
you're
it with
just trying to
shite.
take a service down.
I should be in marketing. Don't you think, Alistair?
This is how you describe a DDoS attack. You basically flood a network with shite.
I think so. I think that's fair enough. I think that's certainly how Irish people would describe it.
Dust that you sprinkled over it.
Yeah. But yeah, there were some mad ones, and there's some other little data points in it where...
So 358% year over year, is that? Compared with last year?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And also some of it is to do with the size of them. I can't remember. They spoke about a hypervolumetric DDoS campaign observed in April 25. So by hypervolumetric, they mean the amount of shite.
Where does this all go? Because it's going up at this astronomical rate, and presumably the guys who are doing it know what they're doing to some extent.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it's getting any better. I mean, potentially we could be heading towards some massive Spain-type no power situation.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing.
Although they said that wasn't down to.
No, I know that.
But it is a weapon, though, isn't it? No.
Yeah.
I mean that's the point, isn't it?
And you've got malicious sovereign actors,
correct,
who we won't name.
State
China, Russia, and so on.
Yeah, you have state actors that they have teams of hundreds of people doing this every day.
Yeah,
and just apparently for a laugh. That's one of the things that cracks me up about it. There's no material gain to them. Let's say it's China or Russia or something.
That's not entirely true, I don't think, by the way. So I think sometimes it's knocking over sites or infrastructure.
Yeah.
Who knows what happened?
That's true.
Last couple of days, but also sometimes they're trying to, break into kind of Bitcoin lockers and that sort of stuff. And at that point, there is quite a significant financial gain for them, isn't there?
Yeah.
Fair
if
point.
you manage to clear out one of these cyber vaults or whatever, I think you're making hundreds of millions at that point.
But it's definitely ramping up, and even allowing for the vested interest that people like Cloudflare and maybe parts of HPE have on making it clear how much of a threat there is, because then you've got to buy our fucking solution. I don't think they're lying. I mean, I think it's legit.
Oh, completely. Exactly right.
So there's a lot of it about.
Well, the solution is like insurance, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
It's
just meant to be preemptive, where a solution's sort of remedial.
Yeah, I mean it's minimising the likelihood, but it's not eradicating it completely.
No, and it's a constant arms race. I mean, it's been going on forever, hasn't it?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
And the baddies keep raising their game, apparently.
Yeah.
Helped in part by the fact that they're often helped by governments, which is a bit of a shame.
I mean, the other interesting thing will be, by the way, that they will also benefit from things like AI, quantum computing, that sort of stuff. So the baddies will also be using tools and technologies that are going to help them.
Is like quantum is an interesting one. Is that something that HPE is involved in researching?
Yeah. So actually, some of the servers that we are producing now will work. We kind of future-proof them for quantum. So, when quantum starts to... I don't know the technical detail of it.
That's true. As soon as I asked you, I thought, how long have you got? Even if you knew.
I'd have to have 3 or 4 Fosters to be able to comment specifically on that.
Ignore that question.
We see quantum definitely coming around the corner. So the technologies that we're producing now... Because obviously when customers are buying our technology, quite often they're keeping it for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and these sorts of technologies will be layered on, won't they, down the future? So
I find the whole quantum thing really quite scary, because it's like at some point someone makes some big breakthrough where they can sort of smash through all encryption that exists at the moment, and the first person to do that, we're all at the mercy of them until we catch up. And in the meantime,
the biggest hindrances for quantum right now is the computing's got to take place at like absolute zero or something, incredibly cold temperature. I think that's one of the things.
It's hard to make qubits. That's the thing. They're quite fragile.
Right. Yes. And so there's lots of just real like physics stuff getting in the way right now.
Dark arts.
Yeah, dark arts.
Black magic.
Like Arsenal at the start of the season.
There's only about 6 people on the planet who understand it properly, right? So
and none of them are in this room.
One's at BT, one's at HPE. There's a 3 in China.
They always say if you think you understand it, that means you don't. So.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, quite. Well, I'm going to segue at this stage, but this is sort of semi.
I think Katy Perry might know it though.
Katy Perry, because she's been up in a rocket.
She's been reading the book.
Yeah. So we were talking about things like sovereign cloud and some sort of geopolitical stresses, and then we were talking about security. And so we're going to move on to one or two other newsy items that we cover for the last bit, as we normally do. Alistair, did we cover that security bit to your satisfaction, mate?
This is an HPE topic as well, though.
We'll go. So there's a bloke called Brad Smith, who's vice chair and president and chief legal officer at Microsoft. And he did a blog yesterday that was headed Microsoft announces new European digital commitments. Now, I didn't cover it, but I just read a few bits of coverage of it. And one thing that jumped out at me is he was sort of going, look, we're really committed to Europe, and sort of almost, I don't know how explicit it was, but almost wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't worry, if our government goes mental and tries to cut you off, and we all know the sort of thing he's referring to. Don't worry, even though we're an American company, we'll make sure you're all right. We got all these firewalls and fail safes and all that sort of thing. And I just thought that was really interesting, both in terms of what we were just talking about just now, but also more broadly the geopolitical thing. Because if you're a big multinational company, as all big companies really are, except maybe one or two Chinese ones, you can't afford to necessarily go along with this, what appears to be the political sentiment of the Trump White House, of being quite isolationist and quite sort of prickly towards the rest of the world. Because, I mean, I'd love to see, I was thinking about this the other day, I'd love to see what proportion of an aggregate of let's say, top 50 US companies, what proportion of all their revenue they get outside of the US. It'll be a very large proportion on the whole, I would have thought. So they're all thinking, with this sort of quite spiky, the rest of the world has been, I don't know, we need to realign our relationship with the rest of the world. They must be getting a bit paranoid about all the revenues they get from Europe and other parts of the world. So that's what I thought when I saw this thing. But Ian, you've been thinking about this a bit more, and you've got a work in progress.
It's an older issue than the Trump administration, this idea of the sovereign cloud in Europe.
Yeah.
Because, I think for a long time, Europe's been concerned about the fact that it doesn't have, you talk about the trade imbalance with the US. We sell a lot of products to them.
Yeah.
Stuff.
UK doesn't have a trading balance with the US, by the way.
Fizzy wine that you can actually drink, things like that, we sell to them.
No one buys Yank champagne.
And they sell to us quite a lot of services. So if you look at it on the services side, we've actually got quite a big deficit with them.
We buy Google, they buy Bubbly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's basically exactly what it is. And
it's got language again.
And so they don't.
Mobile.
We don't have these big hyperscalers. And I think that's been a concern for years and years, that we don't have a Google, a Microsoft, or an AWS, which are the three that kind of get grouped together. Although there are other people in this market, but none seems to be able to do things the way they can. And you look at it's very telco relevant, because you look at all the telco operators, and they might not be running their network functions in public clouds, but they're certainly relying on them, as other organisations are, for OSS, BSS, back office stuff, like just general CRM, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And therefore you're kind of reliant on an overseas. I mean, you wouldn't in this day and age, you wouldn't want to be using Huawei's cloud, which you tried to push into and has done quite well out of, I think, in China. But you would never see an opportunity for that, really.
No, and even if it's good, because you end up getting sanctioned. But
I just think Europe's more concerned about the idea of having its own providers and the notion of sovereignty. So I mean, it started out this worry that data was being company and customer data was being stored, like for Germans outside Germany, let's say, and they tried to get around that by introducing legislation that meant you had to have it within the country, and that's meant people like Microsoft investing more in European data centers and doing this kind of thing. And then, as I understand it, and I talked a bit to Howard Watson at BT about this at Mobile World Congress. Mm-hmm. It's more now about who actually owns the infrastructure that's doing those services. This idea of the sovereign cloud, that maybe it's not good enough just to have the data center itself being
physically
located in the country, but who owns this? And you've seen the emergence of
who owns the data center, or who owns the data within it, or both.
This is where I think it's a bit of a fudge, because you've got these entities, like there's one called Bleu. Is that how I pronounce that?
Sounds like French bleu.
Bleu.
As in Sacre,
a joint venture between Orange and Capgemini.
Yeah.
And it's like
Spanish, right? Anyway, go ahead.
No, they're both French. Capgemini.
Oh, really? Okay.
Pierre, why you always name your companies after colours? What's going on? We've got bleu and orange so far.
Okay, that's two.
What about Cafe Rouge?
Yeah.
I think that's a French company, isn't it?
Detail.
So Bleu was set up I think a year ago, just over a year ago, by Orange and Capgemini, and it's kind of a French sovereign cloud. Yeah. So it's 50-50. They own the they're supposed to own the infrastructure. By the way, I'm doing this pod at a point when I've got questions in with Orange that I haven't got the answers to yet.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
some of
this is a
bit
work in progress
speculative.
for you right now.
Yeah, but
We'll probably polish this tomorrow, by the
but
way.
the idea that doesn't matter because I'm not going to say anything. If
Will
I
it be
don't
ready
know
tomorrow,
it,
Pierre?
But I'll speculate. But the point is, if you look at Microsoft's blog mentions Blur, that one that you're looking
Okay.
at now, as an example of what it's doing on sovereign cloud. And
It certainly does.
if you look at the statement that came out from Orange originally when they talked about it, yes, they might own the data centers. It's 50-50 Orange, Capgemini, but it's still all the underlying technology comes from Microsoft. It's not like they have the opportunity to kind of bring in AWS or Google if they want. It's Microsoft's the driver. It's like, the car's owned by Orange, but the driver is Microsoft. And therefore they've got this weird paragraph in there that I noticed. If you were just talking about if the US was to say...
Yeah, I'm just trying to find that,
If
actually.
the US was to say, we don't want you providing services in France anymore, data centers in France, get out of there now, which is pretty unfathomable, really. It's hard to imagine that happening. But let's say it did happen and people are all of a sudden are thinking about this stuff more now. They've got this really bizarre paragraph that you would never have imagined reading 3 years ago about we're going to put some encryption keys for our code. All the source code is in this repository in Switzerland
Where it can't be touched.
Where it can't be touched, and then we'll give you can read it out if you
Shall
want.
I read it? So,
yeah.
so this is within this quite long blog by this lad.
In the unlikely event of an emergency,
Brad Smith.
Put your head between your knees
Yeah.
and kiss your ass goodbye.
So this is where I was paraphrasing it from where I read it. It's like they basically seem to be going, look, Europe, we're not all dicks over in the States. They seem to be saying, and they've got this. So they've got these subheads. One is, well, he's got these Microsoft's new European digital commitments, and there's 5 of them. And the second one is, we will uphold Europe's digital resilience even when there is geopolitical volatility.
Right.
Which, sounds like a euphemism for what I was just saying in Scott language. And then there's one subhead within that called business continuity partnerships. And I'll just read the whole paragraph.
Yeah.
It says,
Paragraph.
Finally, we will designate and rely upon European partners with contingency arrangements for operational God, it's quite wordy, isn't it? For operational continuity in the unlikely event Microsoft were ever required by a court to suspend services. We're already enabling our partners in France and Germany to do this for the Blur and Delos data centers.
There's equivalent thing in Germany.
And we will pursue arrangements for our public cloud data centers in Europe. We will store backup copies of our code in a secure repository. Sounds a bit rude, doesn't it? In Switzerland. And we will provide our European partners with the legal rights needed to access and use this code if needed for this purpose.
I just had this image in my mind when they wrote that of these, like, you sent out this crack squad from Orange on this mission over the Alps to retrieve this code locked in this vault in Switzerland, and no one's got a clue what it's all about.
That's a
And
Tom
Microsoft's
Cruise
gone, we
movie.
can't.
Yeah.
It's like,
and I mean, I think what's interesting about it, and it's interesting that it jumped out at you, is it says that they feel that they need to reassure the rest of the world that even if there's some wacky shit going on with their government, that we're a global company, and we'll do business with people, and we will, the fact that they feel the need to reassure their European customers that they won't just pull the rug out from under them just because something weird happens in the States, I think speaks volumes. So I think that's fascinating. I know that you're working for an American company. I'm not saying anything pointed.
Yeah, I mean, this is reasonably positive for HPE because, one of the things that we've obviously seen over the last 10 years is this move towards the public cloud. But I think lots of customers thought, well, actually, we need a hybrid world where some of your applications are in the public cloud, but some of them are in a private cloud that you would build and own yourself.
Yeah.
Using, hopefully, technology from HPE. So actually, I think this is quite good from a market opportunity perspective because this will mean that we will end up supplying more compute infrastructure for customers to build their own clouds.
Yeah, and I think it's really relevant in telecom because talking to Howard at BT and the other sort of telcos that have concerns about putting network functions into the public cloud, which is a bigger step than putting some of your sort of standard IT stuff.
Yeah, exactly right.
And they want to, and there's been this talk for ages about, the whole of the network's going to go to the public cloud. Look at what AT&T's done, which is actually a misrepresentation of what AT's done anyway, really. And look at what Etisalat's done in the Middle East. I think the desire of those companies to have like control of what they're doing is. I totally agree. It's an opportunity for other organisations to come in, because nobody wants. In the same way that everybody's got worried over the last few years about Ericsson, Nokia and Huawei being the only RAN providers, and if you get rid of Huawei, you're left with two and one's maybe not in a great situation. Yeah, they're not going to get out of business, AWS, Microsoft and Google in a hurry, but you're still concerned about the fact that you're relying on three big providers from one part of the world.
And Oracle as well. Oracle's
the other one.
Pretty good progress as well, I think, aren't they?
They are, yeah.
But to your point, I mean, what Ian was just talking about, something that has come up on a recurring basis for years on this podcast. We've got a friend of the podcast, in fact, the person who provided the cooler, the Yeti cooler that's keeping your Fosters cold, is a lady called Danielle, now Rios, who has been a sort of very strong advocate of the public cloud and telecoms for a while, such that when we first got her on the pod, she lent into some editorials we'd written calling her a cheerleader, and she brought cheerleader pom-poms and all something, which I thought was a great way of like leaning into the narrative. But yes, we always used to push back, and a lot of it, from my point of view, was much more visceral, just to do with control, just to do with ceding control. And I think,
which is exactly what BT would say.
Yeah.
They'd say, we want to, if something goes wrong, we don't want to be waiting for Microsoft to come along and fix. We want to do it ourselves.
Yeah. So that's if something goes wrong. And then I think, I'm not trying to labour the American political point. I'm certainly not trying to go off on a big Trumpy tangent. But when you start to get...
I'll go on.
Well, go on then. No. But when you start to get more unpredictable, volatile behaviour on a political basis, then that adds another layer of jeopardy on that need, on that concern about the control you've got over your stuff. I think when I was reading stuff that was talking about this Brad Smith blog, they were saying that when there was some weird little turn of negotiation that was going on between Trump and Zelensky, and he just pulled, they had all this like security support, intelligence support, and he just unilaterally pulled it. I don't know if he actually did it.
Access to the satellite system, wasn't it?
Well, Starlink as
well.
I think. Yeah. That's right. He lent on Musk to do that, who's obviously been part of
they
very...
just turned it off for 2 weeks.
They just said,
no more data.
Bad Zelensky, and just turned it off.
Yeah.
And the problem with doing things like that, and Trump probably thinks it's a really good sort of hard-ass negotiation technique, but the problem with things like that is then everyone else is thinking, well, if he can do it to him... And so that's where it's even more important, this, and where it might, in a business sense, benefit people like HPE, where people are going to invest even more in more localized and more autonomous, more self-contained sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Right, but the other, if you want to be really geopolitical about it, the sovereign cloud sort of stuff that Europe's coming out with, I kind of see as a bit of a fudge. It's that it doesn't solve this issue of Europe not having its own
And I've heard its
own cloud player,
So it's located geographically in Europe, but it's still...
It's located geographically
American
in Europe.
infrastructure,
so talk about Blur,
software,
for instance, as an example. 50-50 Orange Capgemini, however you want to pronounce it.
Depends how French you're feeling.
Like you look at the original Orange statement on it, all the services are from Microsoft. We had, you mentioned him earlier, Dag Peek from Alianza, which is a cloud. It's in the cloud player business, but it's obviously much smaller, doing private stuff. But they did buy Metaswitch from Microsoft, and he was talking about this issue of switching between hyperscalers once you become reliant on some of their services.
Yeah.
Some things with Kubernetes and some of these other tools, it becomes quite easy to move from one platform to another. Other things you get very locked in. You look at some of the startups like Snapchat, and you can go through their SEC filings about the problems they've had when they've tried to go from Google to one of the others.
And we got that famous quote from Scott Petty about it being a pain in the arse.
Exactly, yeah. It's pretty much what Scott Petty at Vodafone said.
Scott Petty, I presume you're aware of.
I used to work with him,
Right. And we asked at a press event a few years ago, we were talking about public cloud, and I asked how easy it is for them to move from one to another, and he said it's a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
And we've used that quote loads of times.
Yeah, and then I think Dag Peek was saying he came out with a good number of how many services they had that were kind of very much dependent on Microsoft, maybe.
Right.
And if they went to another platform, it would be a real pain in the arse, basically. So this Blur is heavily reliant on Microsoft. Whoever owns it,
Yes.
they don't really have equivalents, and they don't have their own. France doesn't have its own infrastructure equivalent, and
that'll be a lot of the reason
sovereign-
for this blog.
sovereign
It's like, don't
cloud
worry, you
is-
can rely on us. You
Of
won't
course,
regret it.
exactly,
Sort of thing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but the sovereign cloud thing is really kind of a bit of a fudge, I think. And
Yeah, I hear you, but it's a fudge that they got no alternative because there's no European.
I think
Yeah.
there's a
Equivalent.
report, wasn't there, that was done by Draghi, the former Italian.
Mario Draghi,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he's made lots of recommendations about what Europe needs to do.
That was a famous report.
And I think
Yeah.
this links to some of it, doesn't it? And I think
Yeah.
they're trying to push people into setting up very much standalone European legal entities, so that in the event that you did have a geopolitical situation, you have an entity that's run and controlled by Europeans.
right,
So I think that was another element of his recommendations. I've seen some stuff around that.
yeah,
I've got a bit of a tangent on this, and I've mentioned it recently before on the pod, but I still think it's worth saying. A lot of the argument we always hear about why you shouldn't work with Huawei is because they're too
Chinese.
directly controlled by the.
Well, they're too
CCP.
Chinese.
I know, but the specifics within that, outside of just outright xenophobia, the specifics
No, I
within
didn't mean it in a
Yeah,
xenophobic
yeah.
way.
Is that they are too closely aligned to the government. In their case, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and
Phil, do you want another?
I'm okay at the
Drink.
moment, thanks, yeah.
and then a lot of what seems to be going on since then is for national governments in the West, especially the US, to put direct pressure on their companies a lot more, which I just think is a bit hypocritical. You can't have it both ways. You can't say don't work with Huawei because they're too close to the Chinese government. At the same time, make sure if you're an American company, you do what the American government says. I just think, and I know that's a massive oversimplification. I'm sure that the level of direct control and influence the CCP has over Chinese companies is higher than the equivalent in the US, but I still think they're starting to blur those edges. And I've got one anecdotal example that came up this week. There was just one story. It was a single exclusive. And I can't remember. It was a relatively obscure site. I can't remember who wrote it. They said that Amazon's thinking of putting the tariff cost against every product. So you go onto Amazon, you're going to buy a pair of headphones.
Yeah.
And it costs 50 quid, and they're going, well, it's costing 55 quid, and they identify, or plus.
Oh, yeah. I
Wait,
remember.
what's
that.
the exact wording?
Because
did they
Catherine Levitt held up a picture of Jeff.
Yeah,
Bezos,
that's what I'm
like,
leading.
"You're
That's what,
public enemy number
that's
one.
what I'm leading
now."
up to. Yeah, yeah.
Did they report they were thinking of doing it, or did they report they were going to do it?
I think the report was that they were thinking of doing it. And anyway, as Ian
That's
just
so
said,
vague.
but it was just one report.
Yeah.
But this administration's so trigger happy that this young spokeswoman for the administration called Caroline Levitt, who, you know, she's just doing what she's told. I mean, she's very good at her job apparently, but you know, it's not her own ideas. She's passing on the message. We know all about that, don't we, Alistair? I'm just winding him up. This is what you get for sitting in the room. You get a few little wind-ups thrown at you every now and then. But she just went and got really aggressive and just went, you know, what they're doing is fucking treasonous or something like
But
that.
they're not doing anything.
No, well, then I've got it up because I've actually got the
They denied
public
the whole
statement,
thing.
the very short public statement from Amazon, written by Amazon staff. So it could just be some geezer in a warehouse. And it goes, quote, "The team that runs our ultra low cost Amazon Hall store considered the idea of listing import charges on certain products. This was never approved and is not going to happen." So that's their public response to it. But the reason I bring it up is it went from one little story about them maybe doing that to the government directly publicly confronting them.
Yeah.
And that to me is another illustration of the point I was making about a blurring of this area where there's excessive.
They also said
state
they would not
intrusion.
look favorably if car manufacturers
Well,
pass on the.
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of tacit threats.
What do you
isn't
mean
there?
by not looking
Not look favourably? Yeah.
Yeah, but China's a different case.
It is.
because
I agree.
they-
It's different. I agree. It's different. I'm just saying that we're creeping in that direction.
Because they were not doing that before.
No, but they would. I mean, to say
Not in the press. At least.
to liken to liken concern about stuff that's going on in America to worry about China being involved in Europe is like that you'd regard that as two different things. If you talk to people at what is it like GCHQ or something in the UK, or the guys that do the Huawei cybersecurity stuff, they would say we're not really worried about anything that comes out of America because they're still our geopolitical friends and it's democracy, and you're not, we're not going to go to war with America.
Yeah, which are all valid points, and I'm not pushing back on. I'm just saying,
with some of the stuff that's going on at the moment, obviously, we're not as friendly towards America maybe as we used to be.
Well, there we are. So there's another thing. Things can change. But my point is, I'll reiterate it again. I just think it's a bit rich to say don't work with Chinese vendors because they're too close to the Chinese government, while at the same time your own government leaning heavily on your own companies. That's all. And I know there's orders of magnitude difference, and I won't labour the point anymore. But I just think these are interesting times, and that'll be one of the reasons why Microsoft felt compelled to do that blog.
The other thing I was going to say about that is there's quite interesting stuff in there about Ukraine, because this like national sovereignty, like where you store your data and have your data centres. This is a more secure thing to do, put your data centres in the country. Well, that's all very well until Russia decides to start flattening your infrastructure.
Yeah.
So one thing that Ukraine's done apparently is move, I mean, we've covered this before, I think, on Light Reading, but they've moved pretty much all their critical data outside Ukraine, all their servers,
right.
all their servers that host like state important stuff.
Yeah.
Hardware stuff.
It's all moved to I suspect places like Germany. It's all outside Ukraine now, hosted on Microsoft like equipment, but not inside Ukraine, because they were such nervousness about if it gets if it goes up in a Russian missile attack, you can get the electricity back up in the base stations, but if the actual data goes up, then you're kind of really screwed. So sometimes it's a good idea to have all this stuff not inside your country. But I just think it's all this stuff nowadays in this IT dependent world is kind of nobody would have been talking about this 5 years ago.
We just need a big solar flare to wipe it all out, all of it, all our mortgages, everything.
I've heard that it's a solar flare that I heard that it's a solar flare that did for Spain in that big energy thing.
This week.
Well, no one really knows, so everyone's just madly
It was a
speculating.
strange.
I thought
They said it was weather.
it was.
They did say it was a weather event.
Yeah.
I thought it was like the solar.
Did
farms,
they say it was a bit hot?
Like the inputs on the grid were too sporadic, and then it caused it to.
I've heard
fail,
people who've got an agenda on the renewable side who are hostile to it. They go, because anytime something comes up that affects power supply, for people who've got that agenda, they'll be like, you see, it's all bollocks. But maybe that was. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's where the solar flare thing comes in. Maybe all the solar panels just suddenly start pumping out electricity like a mofo, and then that messed with the grid. But anyway, the problem is no one knows.
Do you know that's how Huawei makes loads of its money these days, from doing solar panels?
Solar panels, and they're pretty strong on EVs, aren't they?
Well, it's software for cars, I think.
Right. Oh, I think they're getting involved. Oh, there's another.
I don't
bit
think
of
they
a
make the
tangent.
cars.
There's all stuff designed to make Alistair nervous. Sitting there going, oh, right now they're going to fucking go on about China for the rest of the pod. There was a thing I wrote about at the start of the week, which was quite fun. Every now and then you get these stories about how China's catching up on chips. So the US has been trying to stymie Chinese chip development since this predates Trump, to be fair to him. And then every now and then something comes on. It could be a launch of a Huawei phone that somehow got a 7 nanometer process chip in it, and everyone's going, I thought they weren't supposed to be able to do that. And we've had chats about EUV and DUV and multi-patterning and all that sort of thing. But there was one this week. I'm just going to find it. I wrote it up at the start of the week. Where is it?
It wasn't about them getting into EUV, was it? Because that's a few weeks old.
No. Here we are. My headline is China continues to goad the US with advanced chip claims.
Right.
And this was...
It was Huawei, yeah.
That was Huawei. So then my strapline is Huawei's latest AI chips
yes.
are reportedly closing the gap on Nvidia's. But then I said, but any such claims are politically loaded and difficult to verify. Anyway, I got into it, and basically there's a bit of... It was Wall Street Journal had written a story about something called the Ascend 910D. So Huawei's had this Ascend 910 thing going for... I think about 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And they're AI chips. And obviously the big player in AI chips right now is Nvidia. Presumably HPE's spending plenty of money with Nvidia right now.
Yep.
And And the US press freaks out every time they think that China might be anywhere near Nvidia in terms of AI chip competence.
Well, they are anyway. I don't think the reason Nvidia's ahead is because they can do better hardware than Huawei or Intel.
I think that's part of it. I think the bang per buck in a
It's CUDA.
No, I know that's a big part of it. But I think
Phil,
we will never know. I need to go to the restroom again.
Okay, well, go on, mate. Well, me and Ian argue. Oh, you're going to go as well?
I'm going to go as well, so I'm glad you said that.
All right, now we're back. I think this is the first time we've ever had 2 bog breaks in one pod. I blame Phil because he's on these larger Fosters.
I blame you.
You blame me?
Yeah, you're a bad influence.
Okay.
He's a bad influence. Fair enough. Phil.
So we're going off on all these tangents. This seems like as good an opportunity as ever to draw a line under those tangents and just have one last final segment that I fancy chatting about. We quite often, Phil, we have the bit at the end that I call the Scott Bacino self-indulgence segment, which is normally the least telecoms-y one. It often involves things like, free speech, civil liberties, that sort of thing. Okay. But in this particular case, it's not quite that. It's one I wrote this morning before coming in for the pod. And the headline was, Apple in trouble after willful violation of 2021 US court order. And I think this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, just the drama of the thing itself, which I'm about to detail. But the other is kind of stuff we were nodding to earlier, which is the antitrust stuff, the trust-busting stuff that's going on in the US, and some of the unique pressure that very large companies come under. And I think HPE is sort of below this threshold, but perhaps near enough. That's why when we were going on about the Juniper thing, perhaps it's getting a bit of like collateral damage from it. But the ones that are very much above the threshold are people like the big hyperscalers, and Apple is another. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Apple's got this, as anyone who's got a smartphone, which is everyone, will know, you've only, whoever you've got, whether it's Android or iOS, you've just got a single app store that you use. And on that app store, it's completely curated by the owner of the platform, i.e. Apple or Google. And when you buy an app on that, 30% of the money that you spend on that app goes straight to the platform owner.
Yeah.
And that's a source of a lot of grievance among big app developers. And the one that's taken the biggest initiative to confront this is called Epic, who is a company that, among other things, produces a very popular online game called Fortnite.
Even though they've made loads of money out of a platform that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
Well, good point. That's a good
yes,
pushback.
Yes, you tell him.
Yeah, look at him being all sad, pro Apple.
Well, they're whinging about a market that Apple's created.
Yeah.
It's like
I'm not very sympathetic.
Yeah, you're making a killing out of your ships in Mayfair, and then you're complaining about the.
It's like when Netflix is being asked to.
I didn't think I'd been such a minority on this. Go on, carry on, Pierre. Sorry.
No, you know when they were asking like Netflix and to like give them like Verizon, no, like the network builders were like asking.
We give the opportunity to do this, but you're gonna have a whinge about us anyway. You know.
Right. I don't know how it works, but I would guess, though, so if you run Play Store, which is the Android equivalent, and I don't know who runs that. Is it Google?
Yeah.
They run it, do they?
Yeah, they basically got a complete
stranglehold. So let's say the Apple cut is 30%. I would imagine if you're Play Store, you have some incentive to offer a smaller cut to try and get Epic to load either their games exclusively on the Play Store,
but they
or at least launch them first on the Play Store.
Yep.
But
what were you going to say, Pierre?
I mean, I've got.
No, I think that works with.
I might try one of your
that works
beers,
with.
Have you got another one of these things?
Well, you can have this punk if you want.
That works.
Other than that, we just got your Fosters.
Oh, is that right?
This is not quite the same, but it's the same brew.
Sorry, Pierre. Don't give him any more. He doesn't need any.
No, I'm going to drink something else.
Okay, why don't you have a Foster's? Why don't you see if you're tough enough for a Foster's?
No, I don't think I am. I think I'm so
tough.
a
Foster's.
I think I'm so tough I'm going to have a Citrus Collins.
Anyway, you about to stick up for Google over
Well, no, I'm going to... Pierre was about to say something, and then I will...
I think what Phil just said makes sense for console games, where Grand Theft Auto is coming out on, let's say, PlayStation exclusively for the first 6 months, and then on Xbox, blah, blah, blah. Because, not everyone have a console, but the thing is that they would lose so much of not being on Apple, even for a few months, I mean? Like, there's so many iPhones, I don't know.
So I got 2 bits of pushback to your argument, Phil. One, you seem to be arguing on sort of basic competition grounds.
Yep.
But it's a duopoly, and competition operates differently in a duopoly. i.e., natural cartels form organically.
They both agree on
there doesn't
30%.
even need to be a conspiracy. You've only got one competitor to keep an eye on. So you're right. In an ideal competitive environment, they should think, well, let's undercut Apple and entice people over onto our place. But the flip side of it is they've got an incentive, both of them, to keep their margins nice and high and not fuck with each other too much. And it's easy to spontaneously coordinate because there's only two of them. And the other point I'll make is the platform's a platform. There's no real competition. If you've got what phone have you got, Phil?
I've got Samsung.
You got Samsung, so you're on Android. So you got an Android phone. You're not really. There's no competitive pressure from Apple on that phone, is there? You're stuck with that
3 against
platform.
2.
There isn't, but the Android or the Play Store, so Play Store links to Android. Android, though, is actually quite a broad ecosystem, isn't it? I know the product is built by Google or used to be, or I don't know the status of Google involvement anymore. But you've got
it's total.
but you've got
controls all of it.
Samsung, implementing it. You've got Sony on Android. You've got Google themselves on Android. Blah blah blah. You would hope there's enough voices there to say. Actually,
I don't think there is.
You don't think?
I think there is. I think it's total control. This is a problem. Nokia years ago, when it was still a big handset player, used to freak out. It used to have a platform called Symbian, which prior to iOS and Android was the dominant smartphone platform.
Yeah.
And there was once this
Before
is
they
going,
were really called smartphones.
yeah, more or less, or when smartphones just meant
It was a good shit phone platform.
well, but there were smartphones, as they called them then, which were ones that
They weren't very good and
No.
not very smart.
they weren't very good, and they certainly weren't very good as I remember once I reviewed a Symbian phone. This was after 2008 when Android and iOS kicked off. I used to be a different kind of tech journalist, and I was also a smartphone analyst. This is kind of my legacy wheelhouse. And I reviewed the Symbian phone, and it was all good. And I said, it's great, but the conclusion of my review was, it's really great until you pick up an iPhone or an Android phone, and then it's shit.
Yeah.
I don't think I literally said shit, but that was certainly the
Close to.
sentiment. Yeah. I was more restrained in those days, Phil. And
Back in the day.
yeah. I used to drink less then, probably.
Could you drink less?
It turns out,
Now
yes.
drinking baby shams. I mean, could you
Are
drink
you?
less?
What is that
Babe
you're
shots. This
drinking?
is something that's been sitting here for ages. It could be one of the ones that Elena brought.
It's probably gone
It's
off.
called, well, it tastes all right. It's called Bombay Pressé Citrus Collins.
Best before
doesn't-
And it's Bombay Sapphire and Lemon.
2002.
Look, it's 6.5%, so stop calling me a
Look at the
part-timer.
size of it.
Yeah.
Tiny.
Anyway,
we digress.
It feels summery. And
Goes with the shorts.
yes, exactly.
So the Symbian, it was.
Yeah, so
until you
Symbian
used
was all
another
right,
phone.
and that was like early smartphone platform, and that was to distinguish it from proper what they used to call feature phones, i.e. your standard Nokia candy bar, where about the only computational stuff you do is perhaps a little bit of playing Snake and maybe something that we used to call WAP, which was like a pre-3G thing where you could get football scores, but just as text. There was no internet, there was no data per se.
Yeah.
And the point is, when those two came along, they established a duopoly, and now there isn't real competition. So those are the arguments I would make, against people who like you all spontaneously push back straight away when I was talking about this Epic thing. But where I have sympathy for Epic is Epic's in a situation where no matter who they go, they've only got two places to go, Android and iOS. Both places charge suspiciously exactly the same 30% tax on all the business they do.
But we have no idea how much it costs. Like they might 30% might be exactly what it needs to be, or it's cheap, or we have no idea.
Yeah,
When they charge,
exactly.
I think we do.
when they charge for a terabyte of storage per month, they said this is this much. We have no idea actually.
I
how
think
much
we
it
do.
costs.
I think we do.
Epic may sell
How
the
can you measure
product that they would have sold for 100 at 130. So
No, I
they could be whole, couldn't they?
And I think that pushback that you all gave about how without that platform, where the fuck would they be, is good pushback. Although it was originally a PC platform, so that's one slight counter to that.
Which
But-
phone do you use?
I've got an Android one as well. It's a Pixel.
He's
Google
very
Pixel.
anti-Apple in a slightly
And
depressing
who do you
way.
use?
So in this room, it's
Apple.
3
It's
against
not
2.
an anti-Apple thing. This is a judge.
No,
This
but
isn't
look,
me.
in this room, it's 2 against 3 apples, for example.
Yeah, we have a big fight.
Yeah.
I back Phil. He's doing a fucking Iron Man. I'm just going to stand behind him. Yeah, Phil, protect me.
No, but you do think like 30%. You're like somehow we know exactly that's too much. Like how do we know?
Because there's been, I can't tell you all the granular details now, but there've been court cases which I'm going to lead to if I get half a fucking chance.
How does the court?
And there's been lots of discovery.
You get a bit punchy after the baby shams, don't you?
Yeah.
What is this stuff? It's not 6.5%.
Toucan Van Damme, as Fizz used to say.
Yeah, well, half the fun of this pod is it's definitely a bit looser by the end than it is at the beginning. There's been discovery. So let me pivot it back to this court case that I wrote about this morning. Epic's been taking Apple to court over this stuff, and granted, I get the sense in this room that there's not much sympathy for Epic. Fair enough. Anyway,
They do Fortnite, yeah?
that's right.
No sympathy for them.
Okay, fine. This is some proxy thing about your son spending too much time on it,
Yes.
is it? Yeah. And this court case came to a conclusion in 2021, where Epic was trying to get the court to conclude that Apple's a monopolist, and in that aspect of the court case, Epic lost. The court decided Apple wasn't a monopolist, but it did say in a slightly equivocating way, it said it's not a monopolist, but it better stop doing this kind of monopolistic shit that it's doing right now. So I suppose it was sort of going, all right, Apple, it's last chance saloon. You're not a monopolist, but I think you're behaving in a monopolistic way. So just stop behaving in a monopolistic way, then we've got no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they didn't. And this is what landed Apple in the shtuck now. They went through all the appeals, and the appeals are finally exhausted in 2024. And this court order from 2021 then kicked into effect. And since then, Apple's been fudging it. So instead of like charging the 30% tax straight up, and I think this only happens within the US, the jurisdiction of this court's only the US, it's instead letting people. So the biggest problem Epic's got is it wants people to be able to go from its iOS app, and then be able to click through into the Epic digital domain and use the Epic payment processor. Like one of their biggest issues isn't just the price that you pay for the app originally, is every single bit of
the ongoing
microtransaction
all goes back through the 30% cut.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
So does that slightly temper your pushback? I don't know.
Yeah.
they want to bypass the iOS basically.
Yeah.
They want to bypass the iOS when it comes to, but in their case, and I could be, to Ian's point, being excessively antagonistic to Apple and sympathetic to Epic here. It's quite possible. I'll let the audience decide. But they're saying, look, they're just taking a piss now. Every time someone buys some stupid in-app purchase, which probably is bringing PTSD to Ian, I'm sure you've had to shell out some money to Alex over sort of crappy little in-app purchases. I certainly have with my kids over the years. Apple still gets 30% of the action, and basically they just think it's monopolistic, and I've got some sympathy for that.
But isn't the game free? Like that's the whole point. Like,
yeah, well, that's a good point as well. If it's freemium, then
where do they get the money?
Yeah, so I guess what we could argue is there should be some middle ground. Apple's entitled
So they're
to a
relying
bit
on
of the
Apple
action.
for marketing.
Yeah, and for the platform and for access to the iOS audience. This is where I'll concede the point that you all made at the start.
30%.
Anyway, well, a certain judge doesn't seem to agree with you, Ian.
That was wrong.
I would imagine as
doesn't
well, Apple is taking some credit and currency risk as well. By the way, I'm not saying that justifies the 30% in any way, right? But there's some contributing factors to that, isn't there? And as you said, storage and a whole host of stuff.
Well, Apple's got a very full and cogent, as you would expect, argument for why it's justified.
Yeah.
If a kid gets bullied on the game, via they can talk to each other, right? If a kid gets really badly bullied, is that on Epic or Apple? Is it?
Well, I would say one
more on Epic than Apple.
One point I will concede unconditionally to the dissenters in the room is the degree of filtering. Something doesn't even get on the App Store unless it's past like some really dodgy thing. It could be a sort of a scam, or it could be porn, or it could be just something that you don't want on there. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a filtering process, and I think it's reasonable for Apple to charge something for that. So some of the argument is over whether or not the 30% is justified as opposed to 10% or whatever. Mm. And and there are legal ways of establishing that. I don't think they're perfect, but they can be quite granular and quite detailed. Anyway, this judge, her name's Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers, and she was the one who made the original ruling against Apple back in 2021. And then since then, as far as she's concerned, Apple's been taking a piss.
But now she's famous. Maybe she's using that.
Could be. She thinks Apple's been taking a piss because it's done things like instead of charging the 30% straight up, it's sort of put up some other equivalent kind of price barrier, but at a different stage of the chain. In other words, she thinks they've been sort of vexatious. They've been going along with her ruling, but in a very half-assed, very disingenuous sort of way. Anyway, the really fun thing about it, this isn't actually a pop at Apple. The fun thing about it is how fulsome she was in this court ruling that just got published today. She fucking took a run-up at them. And it's just hilarious. I'm going to read some of it out. What did I say? I said, the incensed judge who made the order, Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers, this incensed her to such an extent that she dispensed with the usual legalese in order to fully express her many profound grievances at Apple's conduct. She may have been further emboldened by a recent EU finding against Apple. For people who don't know, the EU recently fined Apple and Meta for shitty behaviour, and the thing they did Apple for was this thing, I've forgotten the term, but it's basically to do with not allowing people to link out of the app onto third-party sites. In other words, creating this commercial wall around any apps.
Wall gardening.
Do you know what? I can click through and find out. This is winding me up now.
Walled gardening?
Yeah. No. How do you say it? I don't know.
Anti-steering, it's called. And I said it's such great stuff that it's worth reproducing at length. So I'm going to read a few little bits. I'm going to try and cherry pick bits of it live. So opening, it says, for the reasons set forth therein, the court finds, in bold capitals for some reason, Apple in willful violation of this court's 2021 injunction, which issued to restrain and prohibit Apple's anti-competitive. I tell you, I shouldn't wait for this sort of transcribing it to the end of the podcast when my
should be the first.
My tongue's at its most sort of willful.
Apple.
Yeah, better have another drink that hot. Issued to restrain and prohibit Apple's anti-competitive conduct and anti-competitive pricing. Apple's continued attempts to interfere with competition will not be tolerated. And she goes on basically going, Apple are bastards. And she summarises all these things, and there's lots of italics and lots of bold. And the interesting thing about it, I don't know if you ever read any like court documents, that they're normally so full of legalese and arcane language and citations and all that sort of thing that are basically unreasonable. Whereas this one just reads like a blog. Yeah. Like this judge has just gone, fuck it.
Like Donald Trump read it.
I'm pissed off now. And she goes on, I think I'm going to scroll all the way to the end to A, not tax my reading abilities, and B, not tax the audience and the room. I'll go to the final paragraph at the end of all her things. She goes, Apple willfully chose not to comply with this court's injunction. It did so with the express intent to create new anti-competitive barriers which would, by design and in effect, maintain a valued revenue stream, a revenue stream previously found to be anti-competitive. So I think in a legal way, this is what's significant. They'd said doing this is anti-competitive, and Apple went, all right, we won't do it, and then they just did it, just in a slightly different guise. And then the final couple of sentences is, that it thought this court would tolerate such insubordination, I love that word, was a gross miscalculation. As always, the cover-up made it worse. And by the way, there's something I've skimmed over. She's actually directly accusing an Apple exec, a French one, funnily enough, although I'm not surprised, Pierre, of lying under oath.
Honestly?
Yeah. In fact, I'll get to that bit if you're interested. She goes, as always, the cover-up made it worse. And then the final sentence with a little narrative flourish. For this court, there is no second bite at the apple.
Oh! Why we should have the
zing.
And so that's why I bring it up. That's why I bring it up. It's not so much to have a pop at Apple, although I do think Apple.
I think she built a whole case around that soundbite.
Yeah, she just reverse engineered that little burn at the end.
She's going to compote them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that like jam? Yeah. But yeah, this guy, God, what's he called? It's in there somewhere. Alex Roman. Who was an exec in France, and he's accused of lying under oath. So basically, Apple's in quite a lot of trouble here with this court. And my interpretation, and not just mine, I did obviously read around before I wrote my write-up. In fact, there was
Tim Cook is like added to the pile. Like he has like
no, but this is big. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on between the US government and the courts right now. And a lot of the test of the separations of powers and how much power the courts have is being really tested out right now. But the thing is, courts in principle have almost limitless power. As we see when the EU has a go at a big tech company, that they can fine them huge amounts of money or even stop them operating or whatever. So I don't think you should fuck with courts. But in this case, Apple seems to have thought, yeah, fuck them. And I think they're going to regret it. I think they came out with a statement going, yeah, we're going to appeal. But there's all sorts of other stuff that I won't labour the point where within her ruling where she went, I wouldn't bother appealing if I were you, to paraphrase her. You'll just make it worse for yourself. Yeah, just don't go there, son. She seemed to be saying. And I think to summarise, and then we'll wrap up. I know this has been a monologue, and if anyone else has got anything to say on the matter, and I know you were initially not sympathetic towards Epic's case, but summarise, I think in this particular case, regardless of what you feel about the original case that came to a conclusion in 2021, Apple seems to have misjudged by deciding to, I don't know, more or less ignore what a judge has told them to do. And that just seems like a bad move. And it'd be interesting to see where this goes. What do you think? I know, Ian, I only just sprung this on you. This isn't a story you've been covering. Have you got any thoughts on, not necessarily the merits of Epic's original case, which you've made clear, but what you think about how Apple, the predicament it's landed itself in now?
I mean, I don't think this will affect them that badly, if you want my... I think they're far more likely to worry about tariffs and their Chinese production than they are about this. Is my main comment on all this.
Actually, on another thing on Apple and China and tariffs, the Bloomberg came out and said that the 20th anniversary one in 2 years, they said he has to be made in China because it's so advanced. It has to be made in China, which I thought was interesting. Who, is it China saying that, or is it Apple saying, as in hey, we need to be friends with them because?
Well, I've got a thought on that. If you don't have to say anything, Phil. Would you have any thoughts on it?
I mean, I think, look, with Apple, it's obviously it's great technology, isn't it? But it's also a massive brand.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And I guess the real question is, do you think that court ruling will impact their brand in any significant way?
I think that's a good point. And where they walk this tightrope, there was a guy that I quoted in my piece who's a very well-known, he used to be one of the senior people at TechCrunch back when it was more focused on the tech startup space, called MG Siegler. And he wrote a piece back in 2021 predicting that Apple is too arrogant to go along with it and that they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. But I think you make a really good point. Does it come down to a PR matter? Obviously, whatever, if they get fined or whatever, that's just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I don't think
they're trying to hold on to that cheddar. I mean, they don't want to start losing that 30%. Yeah.
Yeah, well, quite. But will there come a point where, to Phil's point, where that actual cheddar, as you put it, is more than offset by ill will that's generated by their apparent shitty behaviour?
Cheddar.
Yeah, money.
Yeah, haven't you heard that term?
No, and I'm surprised to hear a Frenchman use it.
Yeah, at least he could say his fucking brie or something.
Camembert.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up there. But I think that's a really interesting thing. So we should keep an eye on that. And I think it's gonna come to some kind of head for them. And I just think it's really interesting when people go toe to toe with the judiciary. I think you've got to tread very fucking carefully. That's all. Cool. All right. Well, I think we're done.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, no.
Was it what
really
you expected, Phil?
It's not quite what I expected, but it's been good.
There was more alcohol involved than he expected.
Well, okay, Phil, you did well, mate. That's why we had to have 2 bog breaks.
Yeah, exactly right.
I know you've got stuff to do, perhaps in part in preparation for your Iron Man thing. Otherwise, we'd drag you out to the pub.
Yeah.
But you're welcome to join us anytime. It's great to get to know you.
Yeah, likewise, mate. Yeah, thanks for inviting me onto the podcast.
Cool. All right, so I'll leave it there. I'll say thanks a lot for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.